everybody, welcome to the Jim Master Show Live Entertainment Lifestyle Celebrity Talk Show Series. My next guest coming up just for you is an iconic, legendary, Emmy-winning producer and director, Erni Di Massa Jr. Ernie joining us here on the show. You may remember he was a recent guest when we did the really special tribute to Peter Marshall, the legendary actor, dancer, singer, and of course, game show host extraordinaire, Hollywood Squares and more. We had a fabulous show with celebrity guests, and Ernie was a part of that. Now, our very special guest coming to us from California has worked in television for decades, all the networks, and he has helped produce and create and fund and whatever he could do some of the most incredible, iconic television shows of our time, including The Mike Douglas Show. Yes, that is one near and dear to his heart. And there's something special in reference to The Mike Douglas Show that we're going to tell you about. A little bit of an anniversary, a little bit of a history, taking it down memory lane. Do you remember Fantasy with Leslie Uggams? Yup, that was his baby. He also worked with Oprah Winfrey. And Rolanda, remember Rolanda Watts? I remember her back on WABC Channel 7 Eyewitness News. She had her own talk show that was really popular. He worked with Nancy Glass and American Journal, also Wheel of Fortune and Hollywood Squares and Jeopardy and Inside Edition and Candid Camera. This is just the short list, folks. He's worked with the iconic Regis Philbin on several different projects. And that is, again, just the short list. He is somebody who, again, has brought so much television to all of us and all of our lives. And we're very honored to welcome him to the show, welcoming him back, actually, the return visit. As I mentioned, he was with us when we did the Peter Marshall tribute. If you missed that tribute, check it out on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. You can see it there. We're very excited to welcome him, and we're going to do that right now. Here he is. Welcome to the show, Ernie. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Hey, Jim, what a pleasure to make this work. We had our technical difficulties, but we got it worked out.
We got it all worked out. Absolutely. Try until you get it. That's how you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, right?
Right. I have a funny story.
How have you been since we did the Peter Marshall special? How have you been?
I've been doing great. I've been pretty busy working on Daytime Revolution that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But I have a funny story about doing television live. Years ago when we were doing Hollywood Squares, the associate director had never done a live show. And she asked me what time we were starting the live show. And I said, it's live. And she said, well, what time is that? I said, 7 o'clock live. And she said, no, but I don't know when to start. Jim, are you there?
We're there. I'm just soaking that in. That's funny. She had no idea, huh? That's funny. You've got so many incredible stories, Ernie, and it's really tremendous and an honor to have you here. Let's go back in time. Before we talk about all the incredible work, what inspired you to even go into entertainment and to go into television, producing and writing? Was it something that you were fascinated by and with throughout your entire life, even as a kid?
I was born the same year as broadcast television started in 1947. And my dad, who was a surgeon in Philadelphia, brought home a TV when I was about 3 years old. The TV was half the size of the living room, the box that it came in. The screen was 3 inches, and we had what was called a water magnifier. I don't even know if people know what that is, but you literally would put a pane of glass in front of the TV and fill it with water, and it would magnify the screen. And I just fell in love with television from the time I was 3 to all the way through. I just knew that that's what I was going to do, starting at about 3 or 4 years old.
So when you were 3 or 4 years old, were you doing little things in the house? Were you doing plays? What were you doing at 3 and 4? I mean, we started early in our house. We did plays in the bedroom, plays in the garage. I ran around with the Panasonic cassette recorder, interviewing all the relatives. So we were getting going early. How about you?
I got a Wallensock reel-to-reel 7-inch recorder, which was the first commercial one you could buy for a home, and did the same thing. I was doing radio shows and interviews and running around. My father was a part-time opera singer. We used to do that, and all kinds of great stuff.
That's fantastic. So then, of course, you're 3 and 4, and time goes on. How did you then start to pursue it as a career and get educated in it and start to really develop the experience?
I thought I wanted to be an actor at first because I love Truth or Consequences. And matter of fact, I went to my mother crying when I was 6 or 7 years old because the host was being replaced. Ralph Edwards was being replaced by the new young host, Bob Barker. And Bob Barker was this new guy that I had never seen before, and I didn't like it. I wanted Ralph back. And so I kind of knew that I was going to start practicing in junior high and high school. I talked the teachers into letting me do things in the auditorium. And we actually did a version of Truth or Consequences in junior high. And then I got a small acting part in a film. And that's kind of what turned my career around because I realized that the actors spent all our time sitting around doing nothing while the crew and the director was having all the fun of doing all the work. And I went across the stage and I asked the director what he was doing and how it worked. And he said to me, look, if you want to be on this side of the camera, you can't be on that side. So I decided to cross sides of the camera.
And then the producing started. What was the very first show that you worked on?
Believe it or not, it's when UHF television first came in. And they were dumb enough to, at about 19, 20 years old, let me read the news. So I would sit there at the anchor desk and read the news on Channel 29 in Philadelphia. An old carriage house that had steam radiator plumbing in it.
Was
So
it
when they turned
WTAF TV then, Taft
it sure
Broadcasting?
was Channel 29 out in our,
WTAF,
it
yeah.
was in Ambler. And the studio had steam heat in it with the radiators. So there would be banging in the background all the time. You would hear the clanking on the pipes, you know, you would hear this kind of thing going on in the background, and people would write in and call in and say, what is all that noise in the studio, you know? But then I met somebody on the Mike Douglas show and got the job there. And really my first real experience was the Mike Douglas show.
And that was a couple of streets over at KYW Channel 3 in Philadelphia. Wasn't that the original house for it?
The original studio, which is still there, believe it or not, is in the basement of 1619 Walnut Street in Philadelphia. It was about 3 blocks from my family home. And the way I became familiar with it is when we were in high school and junior high, nobody had a color TV in those days. So we used to all go over to KYW after school to watch television. And they would let us in the lobby and let us sit there and watch the World Series or whatever was going on. And we kind of made it our second clubhouse home.
Didn't you also work back in 1968 on Where Angels Go, Trouble Follows?
That was my acting job. I got a bit part. As an uncast extra, I think, on IMDb. But that's the director I was talking about. And I got to meet Stella Stevens and Rosalind Russell and Van Johnson and Arthur Godfrey and you name it in that movie. And the reason I got hired is I'm 6'6", and there was a scene where Stella Stevens had to be, student protesters were coming up to the school, and she was a nun running a Catholic school. And my job was to lift her off a truck, and then I was the only one with legs long enough to be able to jump back on the truck while they did the shot. And if you watch the movie, I'm in one of the opening scenes. I also got arrested in City Hall courtyard, which didn't make my parents too happy.
You didn't run up the steps like Rocky did you?
No, but it was back in the days of the old Philadelphia red police cars. And you'll see me coming out of a paddy wagon with a protest sign with 2 big Philadelphia cops grabbing me. It's in the opening sequence of the movie.
I mentioned in the introduction, Ernie, that you have worked on and with some of the most beloved television series and shows that many people have fallen in love with. And you've been the executive in charge of programming for shows ranging from Oprah to Inside Edition, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy, produced the Mike Douglas Show, Hollywood Squares, worked with Regis, all the networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and You're a member of the Producers Guild, the Writers Guild, the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and so much more. The Mike Douglas Show, of course, iconic, and it was a staple for so many people for so many years. What was that like working on that show with Mike and company?
Well, I was there for 12 years. I was there from 1969 till 1982 when we went off the air. It was the #1 show in daytime television, often seen by 40 million people a week if you combine the 5 shows. And I had no idea that I was doing a national show because I really never did a local show. It's kind of weird. Most people start their television career in a local show. I was doing the biggest national show as a kid. And it was really an amazing experience. Met over 10,000 guests because we averaged 8 or 9 guests on a show.
Yeah.
And Mike did over 5,000 shows. I probably did about 3,000 of them. So it was a pretty amazing experience.
That's incredible. We got a little promo here if people want a little bit of a refresher and reminder of the Mike Douglas Show. This was aired on WCBS Channel 2 in New York, which aired it in the afternoon. Take a look at this, folks. May bring back a memory or two.
The next Mike Douglas Show, Chip star Larry Wilcox introduces his new bride.
Who was attracted to who first? I walked around kind of gaga goo-goo for about a year looking at her.
With young and restless star John McCook and his new bride, actress Laurette Spang. And the off-the-wall humor of real people, Skip Stevenson.
The best way to pick up girls is to buy an old bus and just about 5 o'clock drive downtown and stop at every...
It was really a beloved series, and Mike, a lot of the hosts of the day back then were like friends. They were part of the family. There was the warmth, and of course he was a singer himself, so he would sing on the show and bring all the different acts on. Behind the scenes, what was it like? Was it fast and furious? I'm sure sometimes guests didn't show up, or things had to switch quickly, or technology didn't work. Anytime anything is put together as, involved as a Mike Douglas show where you have a studio audience and you have guests, all different guests and performances, it can get interesting to say the least.
Well, the show was live when I started working on it. We were 90 minutes live. And if you think about that, 5 days of 90-minute shows, that's a lot of television. That's 9.5 hours of television to produce in a week. And if you think about a 40-hour work week and you take the first 9.5 hours out because you're on the air, that means you have about 30 hours to produce all those shows. And then we went to doing 6 shows a week when we went to videotape. So what went on behind the scenes was often difficult, chaotic, 12, 14-hour days. But it was a heck of a lot of fun. And Mike was just a wonderful boss and he was like a second father to me. The show was created by a guy named Woody Frazier, brilliant producer who started the show in Cleveland in 1961 and hired Mike. They were down to 2 possible hosts, Jim McKay or Mike. And Jim McKay couldn't sing and they wanted somebody who could sing. So Mike got the job. And at the time, Mike had pretty much given up on his career, because he was a big band singer coming out of World War II, a World War II veteran. And he was the band singer for Kay Kaiser's College of Musical Knowledge. You can look that up on YouTube. And it was the biggest big band that make it to television in the early 50s. And Mike made the transition from radio to television with Kay Kaiser. And matter of fact, Kay Kaiser changed Mike's name. Mike's real name is Michael Delaney Dowd, D-O-W-D. And one day, introducing him, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Douglas." And Mike looked over his shoulder and said, "Who's coming out? I guess it's not me." And they said, "No, it's you." Stage manager pushed him on stage and his name was forever changed.
Wow. That's amazing.
Another weird story about that, Michael Keaton, there's the staff of the Mike Douglas Show. That's Woody in the vest all the way over on the far left of that picture. Rick Ludwin below him, who became the senior vice president of NBC, created Seinfeld, did all the Bob Hope specials. That's me in the middle with my head rested on Mike's secretary, lovely English woman named Sonia Selby Wright, and lots of other wonderful people that I've known through my whole career.
One of our viewers asked a question and wanted to know, Did you have any memories when David Jansen co-hosted with Mike Douglas?
Yeah, David Jansen was a terrific guy, and I had been a huge fan of The Fugitive, like we all were back in the day. And terrific, wonderful guy. Had done some stunts in his career, had kind of a back problem going on, but just a lovely, charming actor and terrific person.
We have some really terrific clips that we also want to weave into the conversation. This one here goes back to around 1981, and it's with Don Rickles. Did you want to preface this at all? I think people will enjoy it.
I used to have a lot of fun with Don. Don and Mike would invite me to dinner in an Italian restaurant. Every Sunday night, they'd meet for dinner at a place called Matteo's in Westwood, California. And I would always get Don worked up by making him do something weird with a costume or a prop. And you're going to see a couple of interactions with Don and some weird props and costumes. And Mike kind of egged him on, and we got Don going.
How did you, before we show that, there must have been a wait list. The Mike Douglas show, like Merv Griffin and others of the day and Johnny Carson, Tonight Show, were so popular that I would imagine the I want to be on the show list was long, huh? You had to manage that, right?
Yeah, we had a tremendous list. Obviously, A-list celebrities were, Cher co-hosted the show. You name it, they co-hosted the show. Sonny and Cher actually co-hosted the show back in Cleveland. And then Sonny came on and surprised Cher on our co-host week after they divorced. So, yeah, that was sometimes a challenge to tell people that we couldn't have them on. But sooner or later, almost everybody that wanted to do the show, we found a way. In a 90-minute show with lots of guests, there was always a way to include everyone. We never really excluded anybody. I know there were other talk shows that had sort of enemy lists, people that they didn't want on. There's famous stories about that. Mike was not that way. Mike was wonderfully open. He had an open heart. He was like a second father to me. And we just put them on eventually,
It's kind of interesting when you think about it, because again, putting these kinds of shows together is really an undertaking behind the scenes. And when you have a guest list and you have all these elements you got to put together, and to have it look smooth and effortless once those lights go on, it's heroic work. And again, Mike Douglas show was just one of those iconic series and then of course, Mike was eventually replaced by John Davidson, right? Or at least John Davidson's show came on.
Yeah, my contract was with, at the time, Westinghouse, and Mike had a different deal to go to a different company. It was kind of a messy separation. It's a long story I really don't want to bore you with, but basically they fired Mike. And they decided that Mike had done it for 20 years, and if they could find another young guy, he could do it for 20 years. The mistake they made was the audience was loyal to Mike and wanted to stay with him. So following Mike, they brought in John Davidson, they brought in Will Schreiner, they brought in Mary Lou Henner, and then finally Vicki Lawrence. And the only one that really worked was Vicki Lawrence. And unfortunately, that crashed and burned over a very strange backstage story that we probably shouldn't be telling on public television.
Very interesting. I didn't realize that Will Schreiner and Vicki Lawrence and those other incarnations were part of the thread of the Mike Douglas show. I knew about John Davidson, of course, but I didn't know the others were also other attempts beyond the Mike Douglas show, and that there's this thread. I didn't know that. I remember all of those shows. Yeah.
They kept trying over and over, and the only one that really worked and made a toehold was Vicki. And Vicki's terrific. I love Vicki, but there was a fight between the producer and the company, and somebody punched somebody, and that didn't go over well. And so poor Vicki was a victim of some terrible circumstance, because she was wonderful, and she's still wonderful. I know Vicki well, and she's a lovely lady.
Oh, absolutely.
They're all nice people. Mary Lou's nice. Will Schreiner's very talented.
Yeah. So Vicki's show was a hit, but in a different way.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went on to produce Hollywood Squares with John Davidson, so we remained friends. So.
Yeah. He's a great
You
guy.
want to get back to Rickles, or you want to move on?
Yeah, Rickles, like Foster Brooks said during the Dean Martin roast.
Yeah.
Those Dean Martin roasts were hilarious too. Do you
They
think
were
the
a lot
Dean
of
Martin
fun.
roasts would air today?
No, in a woke world, you couldn't do any of that stuff.
No.
Matter of fact, it's funny. The promo you showed was Skip Stevenson.
Skip
Could you
Stevenson from
picture-
Real People. Yeah.
Could you picture doing a joke today where you said, "I'm going to get a school bus and pick up girls"? It just wouldn't fly.
No.
Obviously, it was innocent and he was just joking, but
Having
if
fun.
you said
right.
that today, you'd be in big trouble.
It would be a whole other world. Here's Don Rickles on the Mike Douglas show back in 1981. Take a look.
Now you've done the eyes, the throat. You haven't done a throat yet.
Yes, we did. You weren't watching,
knees.
dumbbell.
And since
knees,
he just
the knees, and the eye.
insulted me, I will now go for the grand
The
slam.
grand slam.
Ah.
It lights up, if you hit it.
If someone has grabbed you...
Wait a minute, Mary. Let's relax a minute. Hey, Tony Martin and Sid Charisse. Maybe I'll be, maybe I will. Okay, Mary.
If somebody has grabbed you in, say, a bear hug, then you go for the next vulnerable area, which is the
Grand slam.
grand slam. So rather than struggling and trying to get away, just reach back, grab the testicle.
Dr. Mary Conroy. we'll be right back. Steele, I told you. What is the last one?
The last one is Goldie Hawn with pimples.
It was for improving the visualization. It was Goldie Hawn with pimples.
That's right. See, Lloyd, you're catching on.
Lloyd, that is terrific. How long has this been going on? You're adding more weights.
Sure. What does he care? It's not his face.
Tonight, when he goes home, he will notice a major difference.
I'll tell you one
I don't
thing.
believe it.
When he gets up, he's going to fall right on his face.
The wrinkles and the crow's feet around his
He said that
face
to me in the
tonight.
dressing room. He really did. Say, oh, get a little longer and I'll work a mind.
Well, since you're busy and don't have time to do this properly, we got a way.
Come on, Koala Chick. We dig for coal.
We got a way for you to give you.
Oh, it fell on. Oh!
That's all right. We'll put that little one on there for good measure.
Good.
We got a way for you to.
You don't
give
put
all
weights
your-
anyplace else, do you? Because you're missing one spot that could use a big weight. What are you doing?
No, you gotta have.
Wait a second. Why am I always dressing up and you do nothing? You're in your little trick. Wait a second.
Take your coat off.
All right, wait a second. Don't get excited. All right, when do we have the cake? Here, listen to him, Mickey. No, you're not going to drop it on the floor.
What is expensive coat?
Take this, Mickey, and get it back by Tuesday. You're going to put this on?
No, you are.
You put it on. I want you to put it on.
Wait,
Pull it underneath, please. I'm asking you. Please, Mike, you pull it underneath for me. Mike, please, I'm asking you. God bless you, Mike. God bless you. You got it. God bless you.
Okay. Okay, the match will begin.
Now, find me a woman.
Yeah, Don, we always came up with crazy costumes and things to do that Mike would kind of be the straight man and egg him on, and Don would just go to town.
Were you there when Gene Simmons and Toady Fields were on together?
I booked Gene Simmons on the show, and they had called me, the record promoter had called me a number of times and said, we have a band. And I said, well, everybody's got a band. No, it's a new rock band and they're really different. And I said, well, what makes them different? He said, well, they have an exploding drum set and they light it on fire and they have fireworks. And I said, well, it doesn't sound too interesting. He said, well, the guy wears a demon costume. I said, well, send me a picture. So John Wanamaker's is a big department store in Philadelphia. And we set up a contest called a kissing contest to launch the Kiss booking on the Mike Douglas show. And Gene Simmons and Kiss appeared on the Mike Douglas show. And there's that very famous clip of him and Toady Fields. Toady Fields, of course, was a wonderful comedian.
Oh, yeah.
Came out of the old Borscht Belt back in the day. And 5 foot tall and just a wonderful lady. We were the same height when we sat down next to each other. When we stood next to each other, she came up to my belly button.
That's incredible. It is an iconic clip. And what I love about it, too, is the sound of the audience. There's one particular woman's laugh, which is contagious and infectious. And you can hear her laugh. And I think Toady even hears it herself and sort of looks to the audience and acknowledges this woman is in hysterics laughing because the whole scene between Toady Fields and Gene Simmons and the way they're interacting is classic. And we actually have that clip. Take a look.
It was pretty funny because, of course, Gene's family was from Israel.
That's
and
right.
His mother was watching in New York, and she was a wonderful, sweet lady. And Gene had come up with this crazy gimmick to try to get Kiss noticed. And it sure worked for 50 years, didn't it?
I tell you. Also, too, Tiger Woods made a very special TV appearance. And again, you were a part of that. As I mentioned, you've been a part of so many years of iconic television that has influenced our lives through entertainment and information in such an incredible way, Ernie. Tell us about this sort of debut of a young Tiger Woods on the Mike Douglas Show.
Well, you know, Mike was a golfer. He was a scratch golfer, a really good golfer. As a matter of fact, he actually beat Jack Nicklaus one day and posted the scorecard in the clubhouse, and Jack went in and tore it down and got very upset with him. But Mike would always ask me to do golf things on the Mike Douglas Show. And you have to remember that in the 70s, we had a female audience, about 80% women that were home during the day, housewives, had no interest in golf. So I said to Mike, no, we can't do another golf segment. He said, well, there's this father that brings out a 2-year-old at dusk on the course when the course is closing, and the kid can hit a ball 30 yards. And I said, Mike, no 2-year-old can hit a golf ball 30 yards. He said, oh, and he putts. So Earl Woods came into the office at CBS, Television City, one afternoon with Tiger in his arms. He was carrying Tiger in a diaper. And every woman in the building went crazy. They just fell in love with Tiger. So I said to Mike, you know what? The next time Bob Hope is on the show, and it was Bob Hope and Jimmy Stewart, we'll find a way to work Tiger in. And that's how this very famous, probably the two most famous in my entire career are this and Bill O'Reilly. And this is what happened.
That's it. Here it is, a young Tiger Woods on the Mike Douglas Show.
So right now, I'd like you to meet Tiger Woods and his father, Earl Woods. Would you come out? Get that other ball. Perfect. Earl, how old are you, Tiger?
Daddy.
Two?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And, you know, when we did the rehearsal for that, I figured a 2-year-old, I'll use real golf balls because he can't hit anything. He almost killed some of the prop people because that's the thing that you saw. He was driving a real golf ball 30, 40 yards at 2 years old. So you heard the click when he hit it. We switched over to wiffle golf balls because it was too dangerous. And then, of course, he got in the putting contest with Bob Hope. And famous thing is where he picks up the ball and moves it closer to the hole. And Tiger, when Mike passed away, I called Tiger. And the only memorial inside the Tiger Woods Foundation that is not Tiger Woods is the Mike Douglas Memorial. We helped him build a scholarship fund for kids and after school programs. Tiger's really a good guy.
And when Mike unfortunately passed away, wasn't he just playing golf?
Well, you mean Mike?
Douglas.
Yeah, Mike had played golf and unfortunately got as some older people do.
Dehydrated, yes, right.
Yeah, and passed away that evening. Yeah, that was very sad.
I remember hearing
he was
about
still
it.
very active. He was very active in playing golf and doing all kinds of wonderful things. And
absolutely right. Do you think he knew the impact he made? Do you think he knew how much people really enjoyed him, felt comfortable with him, and really appreciated him? Do you think Mike Douglas knew?
I don't think he ever took it to heart. Mike never thought of himself as a celebrity or a big A-list person. We threw a party when we moved to Hollywood, and we had 100 A-list celebrities: George Burns, Jack Benny, Bob Hope, John Wayne. You name it, they were at this party. And Mike said to me, "Gee, I'm really shocked they all wanted to come meet me." So he always said Fred Astaire. Mike was tongue-tied. My favorite guest of all time on the Mike Douglas Show, of anybody I ever worked with, was Fred Astaire, because I had been a huge fan of his movies and who he was. And he was a wonderful man. And Mike said to me backstage that first day we were going to do the Fred Astaire, that's me and Fred Astaire.
You are 6'6".
Yeah. Fred was about 6 feet. And it was just, Mike never took himself seriously. And that's probably what made him he was so everyman. He asked the same questions that the audience wanted to ask. And he didn't act like a celebrity. He didn't feel he was a celebrity.
Right. Exactly. This was special. This is you. And that's Julie Nixon Eisenhower, isn't it? Mike Douglas Show?
Well, there's a history to the Mike Douglas Show. There's a fellow by the name of Roger Ailes that you may have heard of.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Roger Ailes was the first PR guy on the Mike Douglas Show, later became a producer before my time. Because in 1967, I didn't join the show until 69. Richard Nixon guested on the Mike Douglas Show. And Roger went up to him and he said, "I know why you lost the last election to Kennedy. You don't know how to do television. You don't know how to do a debate. I'm going to teach you how to do television. I'll get you elected president." Nixon hired him. He got Nixon elected in 68. Obviously left the Mike Douglas Show, moved to Washington. Best job I ever turned down in my life was working in the Nixon White House, because I probably never would have worked again in show business. But during Watergate, we booked Julie on the show to defend her father, because whatever you think of his politics, Richard Nixon was a brilliant man and did some amazing things. And I met him several times, and I was in awe of Richard Nixon. But of course, the Watergate thing was illegal and terrible. And I was sort of the producer that was defending Julie from the slings and arrows. So she wrote me a lovely note. As a matter of fact, it's right here over my shoulder. Little note right here from Julie, handwritten note about how much, and there are the pictures from that same sequence you just showed, of her appreciation for having been her protector while she did those shows. And she's a wonderful human being, married, of course, to David Eisenhower for, I guess, probably about 50 years now.
What a great moment and a great memory, too, from that time. And I concur with what you said. There were a number of things that President Nixon did that were positive. He sort of got in the way of himself, unfortunately. But if you look at some of the things, people still reference it today. Here's another great shot we dug up. Look at this.
This is on the set of a movie called Gator. And Burt had been doing the show a lot. And
Burt Reynolds, yeah, and Mike Douglas. And
he's told a joke, and I, of course, was reacting to it. What's funny about it is, if you look about idol worship, look at his shirt collar and look at my shirt collar. Look at how far they're open. If you pan down a little further, I don't know if you can, but the belt buckle, I'm wearing the same belt buckle. So Burt and I kind of hung out together, and I got to know him really well. But Burt wanted Mike to play the governor of Georgia in this movie Gator. And the governor of Georgia at that time was our president, Jimmy Carter, now later became president.
Who just turned 100.
Jimmy came to the set and taught Michael the Georgia accent, brought little Amy with him. Amy had a group of cloggers with her. I think Amy was 8 or 9 years old. And Amy looked at me and she said, "My daddy's going to be president someday." And I thought, this little kid is really dreaming, you know? And lo and behold, it came true. And it was a wonderful movie. We had a lot of fun. And Kennedy plays the governor of Georgia in the movie. And it was really terrific. Terrific experience.
And happy 100th birthday this week to Jimmy Carter, who, as of the time of this live show, is, God bless him, still with us, which is
we bonded so much at that taping and shooting of that film that Miss Lillian came to the set, and she loved Mike Douglas, and she said, "If my son gets elected president, the only interview he'll give before he goes to the White House is Mike Douglas." So we all packed up and went to Plains, Georgia, And in Jimmy and Rosalind's house, we did the first interview before he became president. We did about 2 hours with him. And then we brought Billy Carter, if you remember Billy Carter, back to Philadelphia with us. And Billy actually spent a week on the show as a co-host and spent that week staying at Mike's house.
Did you meet their mother? Because their mother was always present too.
Well, Miss Lillian was the mother, and she's the one that picked Mike Douglas as the one to do the interview.
Wow. So she handpicked him. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Great little tidbit there. Here's another great behind the scenes.
This was a photo shoot for the Saturday Evening Post, me briefing Mike in his dressing room. In the background there is the brilliant, my mentor, Woody Frazier, the guy who created the idea of the Mike Douglas Show was called The Mix. And originally it was done in a gazebo. And his idea was to have Mike have not a regular co-host like we did with Regis later, but to have a celebrity co-host every week that would change. That celebrity co-host would then invite their friends to be on the show. And instead of interviewing one person at a time, Mike would allow a panel to build on the show. And then the panel would interact. I mean, you had Richard Pryor talking to Milton Berle. You had Cher wanted to meet Mr. Rogers. So Mr. Rogers came on the show with Cher. I mean, it was just an amazing amalgam of people getting together. Ralph Nader, who did the show many times, talking to Dolly Parton. Just some amazing combinations of people.
There was something else too that people may remember that you were involved in, the Mike Douglas Show was too, involving saving the cable cars. Tell us about that. We have a clip as well from the show.
At the time, this was after the assassination of Harvey Milk in San Francisco, and Dianne Feinstein became mayor of San Francisco. And Herb Cain, who was a big writer in the San Francisco Herald, realized that the cable cars were going to be taken out of San Francisco because they needed $6 million to replace the cable, and no city government official would approve it. So Dianne Feinstein put together a committee. We called and we said, we'll come do the Mike Douglas Show in San Francisco for 2 weeks. We did it at Aquatic Square. The background was Alcatraz across the bay. And the co-host was Joel Grey from Cabaret, and Tony Bennett and Mick Jagger, the Gibb brothers, the Bee Gees, and some other people. And we raised the $6 million and proudly saved the cable cars. But in the true way of doing the Mike Douglas Show, we had to do a stunt. So Franco Columbu, the bodybuilder that actually helped Arnold Schwarzenegger get into acting and was Arnold Schwarzenegger's roommate, said he could pull a cable car with his teeth.
Yeah.
And we said, well, that would be interesting. So that's kind of how this clip opens.
That's amazing. Let's take a look at this iconic clip here on the show. Thanks for joining us, everybody watching around the world. We appreciate all your comments and your viewership. Take a look at this. Again, another clip from the Mike Douglas Show.
Okay, Franco?
I don't know anybody can move this.
I think we got the right guy today. Don't you, Joel?
Yeah, for sure.
You tell me that's not a strong man, ladies and gentlemen. That's only 12,000 pounds that the man is pulling. For an encore, Franco picks up his teeth. He did it! Franco Columbu, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it. Yeah! Look at this! Look at this!
News to the city by the bay, where Mike pitched in to help save a national tradition, the cable cars, and received this honor from Mayor Dianne Feinstein.
And now, Mike, it wouldn't be a day unless I did what mayors across the United States can do. Fortunately, none of them are a mayor of a great city like this, and they don't have you here helping them as we do. I would like, if I can, to present you with a proclamation, which in essence, and I'll read just one part of it, says, whereas Mike Douglas, host of the Mike Douglas Show, will dedicate an entire week of taping in the San Francisco Bay Area to save the cable cars, during which time the theme of saving San Francisco's cable cars will be prevalent throughout the entire series of 5 shows. It's my pleasure as mayor of the city and county of San Francisco to proclaim this day as Mike Douglas Day in the city and county of San Francisco.
That was quite special, huh?
It was pretty amazing. And somewhere in my memorabilia storage, I have a piece of that cable, the original cable that we replaced. And it was every time I go to San Francisco, I think, wow, I can't believe we did that.
That is amazing. Here's another great photo. Take a look at this.
That's my dear friend. Unfortunately, he passed away not too long ago, Bob Racer.
Yeah.
Bob and I were the two PAs on the show that did the cue cards, and this was when we built a new studio. They said, let's have Bob play Mike and Ernie play the co-host, and let's do a week of shows and make sure everything works before Mike comes in with real celebrities. So we did 5 full shows.
You know, the show was really, as I mentioned, it's a part of Americana in so many different ways. And you've worked, as I mentioned as well, on so many extraordinary shows. You also worked on Fantasy. There's Leslie Uggams.
It was NBC in the early 80s. And we created a show, Merle Heater, myself, and a gentleman named Earl Greenberg, based around the idea of letting people, there was no internet, there was no other form of communication besides the telephone and what we today call snail mail. So the idea was we'd have people write us letters, and you could ask for anything in the world, any wish that you had. There were 2 things that had to be. Number 1, the wish had to be for somebody else and not benefit you. And the second thing is it had a great story. So we created this show that was getting 65 to 100,000 letters, handwritten letters, a week to NBC. And we would bring those guests in from all over the country. We did a lot of amazing reunions, brothers and sisters that hadn't seen each other in 30 or 40 years. That's the cast of the show. I had a beard at the time. I'm in the center at the very back. And Peter and Leslie are there. You'll see Leslie in the lower left. And lots of wonderful, that's the whole staff and crew of that show. It took a lot of people to make that show work.
It sure did.
It was also the first show with a revolving stage. We had a turntable in the background, and we were able to actually had the whole stage could move. Later on, I did a show with Terry Bradshaw where I turned it around the other way. Instead of having the stage move, I put the audience on a platform and I had them move. So we had 4 different sets, and the audience went to each different set.
Wow. We've got a little clip here of Fantasy. This goes back to 1983, Ernie. Joan Rivers is in this and company. And
well, I think it starts with Willard Scott, if I'm not
Willard
mistaken.
Scott from the Today Show.
Willard Scott, who wore a toupee on the air and didn't mind showing it.
Exactly. Mr. Smuckers. Here it is, gang.
One more thing. Sean, would you come up here for a second? I just want to congratulate you. And finally, Paul from St. Louis Obispo, would you come up here?
Yeah, come right up here.
Would you hold my cards?
I certainly will hold your
Because as a weatherman, there's only one thing that I can see where you might be just a little bit deficient. And before it's all over, it might just help your act a little bit.
Wait, hold it. That's not bad. Willard, first of all, guys, thank you for making that very tough decision. And Teresa, we've got a lovely...
Close. My new album and my fantasy is to have your body and my album reach #1. Or your body. No, I like it better the other way. My album to reach 0.
I'll be right back. What happened? Hey, wait a second. Come over here. Wait a minute. What happened? Will you hurry up? I just got off with you. You can kill yourself on this. Let me hear it. Take a look. Oh, I love the shoes. Come on. Hey, come on. Hey. Come on here. Love those shoes. Hello.
Hello.
Come on. I want to hear. Come on. Come on. I don't dress up for that. Over here. What about you over here? You're going to get yours too. I mean, I'm not even proud about that.
Well, you get back
I
here.
got you, and I got you too.
Well, you just...
Of course, that ended with the amazing Rip Taylor.
Oh,
and you
my
got to
God.
see the revolving stage in action there.
I tell you, it was quite a show in terms of the amount of people and the amount of production. And it was really something for the time, too, that was unique, wasn't it?
Yeah, there really was nothing else like it. And
No.
it was a very expensive show. The reason we only did a year and a half was it was too expensive to produce. And the network realized if they put a couple of game shows on, they could
Yeah.
cut the budget by about 90%. So
Right. What was it
even
like
in those
working
days-
with Leslie Uggams and, of course, the iconic Peter Marshall?
Well, Leslie was just a pure delight, and Peter, Peter was booked for the show originally, and we needed to find a woman to work with him, and we went through 5 or 6 women, and Peter kept talking about the wonderful Leslie Uggams, and the NBC executives at the time, no, we don't want Leslie Uggams. We want this one or we want that one. And Leslie was just terrific on the show, and actually became the first Black woman to be in a host role on a network daytime television show, which we didn't even realize. We just hired her because she was the right person for the job. And it's funny because a few years later, the Oprah thing happened with me, and of course, Oprah broke out across America.
You kept in touch with, you were a guest on our show when we did the tribute to Peter Marshall. And again, I encourage folks, if you didn't see that really very special tribute that we did, Ernie was with us, and John Davidson and Mark Summers and so many others, and sharing really fabulous stories about the iconic Peter Marshall. And we did this the week of his passing. It was really wonderful and beautiful. And I'm so glad you were able to join us as well, Ernie. But you stayed in touch, you stayed friends with Peter over the years, didn't you?
That was just a few years ago, believe it or not. Peter lived to be 98 and was sharp as a tack. I spent some time in it with just last Christmas. And this was actually at a benefit. A friend of mine needed a kidney transplant. And Peter lived with one kidney for many, many years. And he came along with Rod Carew that evening, the baseball player, and spoke on behalf of the donation. And turns out that a friend of mine was able to donate the kidney. I had no idea that she was even thinking of doing it. And she donated the kidney, and Peter helped save a life that night.
That's so beautiful. Look at this photo. This goes back a little bit too, the Love Report.
This was during the Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles when we did a show for 26 weeks. That's Tawny Little and Chuck Henry. And the show was called The Love Report. It was my first, actually my third show with Fred Silverman. Fred Silverman, the famous executive who had been the only man to ever be president of 3 networks. There was no Fox back then, and he was president of NBC, ABC, and CBS. And I kind of, maybe it was from my days of meeting Richard Nixon, but I kind of got the reputation of being a show dog.
I think you froze there, Ernie. Got the reputation. I think he was trying a different computer. His other computer wasn't jiving, so he switched to a different computer. I think you froze there, Ernie, a little bit. Can you hear us, Ernie? That was a great story he was sharing too. Well, while he figures that out, we can show you some more photos because he sent a lot of incredible photos our way. And we've got some really cool videos as well. He also worked with Tony Orlando. You know, Tony Orlando is a dear friend. And he worked with Tony Orlando on a show back in '86 that was short-lived, but because it was around the same time that Oprah was out, and Oprah just took right off. And it was called the Tony Orlando Show. We're going to show, when he comes back, we're going to show a clip of that. But as I mentioned, in addition, great stories about Mike Douglas and fantasy. He's going to tell us some stories about Oprah Winfrey's show and Rolanda, working with Nancy Glass. Do you remember American Journal, Wheel of Fortune, and Hollywood Squares? He has worked on all of these shows, even Inside Edition, and our dear friend Regis Philbin. And he's worked with him, you know, in different incarnations. But one of the times, you may remember, Regis did an afternoon show on the Lifetime Network, and he helped launch that show, which I think is something really kind of cool. Some great photos that he's sharing with all of us here on the program. Let's take a look at some other ones here. Do you remember that very infamous moment when Bill O'Reilly said, "We're going to do it live. We'll do it live"? Well, the executive in charge of production during the run of Inside Edition, when Bill O'Reilly, you may not remember that Bill O'Reilly hosted Inside Edition, and he's done television news and all well before, the work that he does now. So he's been a broadcaster all these years, Bill O'Reilly. When he was doing Inside Edition, the time when there was a tease or promo to read, the executive in charge of production was Ernie at the time, in that infamous clip where Bill O'Reilly says, gets a little agitated about the situation and says, "We'll do it live. We'll do it live." And so he was there, and that was something special. He's got some stories. Hopefully he'll be able to get his computer working again. He had a little issue with his computer yesterday, and then earlier today, and then he switched his computers. I don't know if his Wi-Fi or something's happening in his area there, but that is really a cool story. And here's another great shot of him with Regis. And of course, he worked with Regis. I was a friend of Regis for many years. I was too. Had met Regis on several occasions, and Regis couldn't have been sweeter, more affable, friendly, nice, just a really, really good guy. One of the really nice guys in the industry too, as was Mike Douglas and Merv Griffin and, all of the folks that we're talking about. In addition, I just want to tell you a little bit more about our iconic guest. Remember Alan Thicke, of course, Alan Thicke from Growing Pains, but Alan Thicke once had a talk show as well, and it was called Thicke of the Night. Well, our special guest, Erni Di Massa Jr., was also involved in that show. We actually have a clip that he sent along that while he's figuring things out on his end, we'll show you that quick clip. This is Thicke of the Night, and it's also Star Search, which I believe he was involved in as well. Like I said, Ernie, for decades, has been involved in so many aspects of the television and entertainment industry. As an executive, as a producer, as a writer, really extraordinary, the years and hours of television he's brought to all of our lives. We're going to take you back in time to Thicke of the Night, hosted by Alan Thicke, the late Alan Thicke, unfortunately, and Star Search, a little clip that was hosted by Ed McMahon.
Hello, I'm Alan Thicke. On the next Thicke of the Night, we've got Flip Wilson. We have singing star T-Bone Burnett, magician Larry Wilson, my own brother Todd, and worm expert George Schroeder. Where else? Right here on Thicke of the Night.
Geraldine didn't look this good last night.
What can I say?
Have
she started out as a pigment of my imagination.
And you and I go, you see the dark spots here? Mm-hmm. That's the worm. Now that's Charlie.
11:30 p.m. tonight on 5. It's the show that shoots for the brightest new stars. Join Ed McMahon, Charlene Tilton, and Danny Thomas for this week's Star Search. 8 p.m. Sunday
on Metro Media, Channel 5, WNEW-TV in New York City.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you and we can see you. Yeah.
Right.
We were talking. We were going
through a power outage, believe it or not.
For some reason, I believe it, Ernie. I believe it.
We just had the weirdest luck with you and I talking on the internet.
I don't understand. So you had a power outage on top of it.
Everything went off for a good 2 minutes.
But the whole place, the lights, everything, huh?
Everything went out, yeah.
Wow. So maybe that's what was happening. Maybe there was something going on that was building up to that.
Well,
and the Wi-Fi was weak as a result of something building up with the power.
I shut off the air conditioning, so...
Conserving.
Open the window.
I was showing, folks some various things, but Thicke of the Night and the Star Search promo. Tell us about the involvement with the beloved and the late Alan Thicke as well, and being involved in. I remember Thicke of the Night, and it used to air in New York on Channel 5, WNEW, when it was Metro Media. We used to watch it in the evening.
Well, while I was working at NBC, Brandon Tartikoff, who was my boss at NBC, along with Grant Tinker, who was married to Mary Tyler Moore, Brandon called me in one afternoon. He said, Fred Silverman would like to meet you. And of course, I wanted to meet Fred Silverman. Who wouldn't, right? And I said, why? And he said, well, he's got this show called Thick of the Night, and it's in big trouble. And you're a good show doctor, and you've got diplomacy. And he and Alan are not getting along, and there are big fights going on. There were 4 companies involved. So I said, well, I'm doing fantasy. How? He said, well, you'll do fantasy during the day. You'll go over there at night. My ex-wife at the time was not real thrilled about that. And I took both shows on, and I went and met Fred. I loved Fred. We got along great. We were able to get a show that was a mess organized. And it wasn't Alan's fault. Alan was terrific. But the original co-host was Richard Belzer. If you remember Richard Belzer.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Went on to have an acting career. And Richard, my first night there, well, 2 weird things happened. My first day that I was going to the studio, they had not fired the guy I was replacing. So he locked himself in his office and wouldn't come out. So we had to deal with that. Yeah. And then the second thing that happened is a lawyer from MGM, which owned part of the show. The show was 4 companies. It was Bob Bennett's Metro Media. It was Fred Silverman's Intermedia. It was a Canadian company called Thick of It Productions, and another company called MGM that you might have heard of.
Oh, sure.
So the lawyer from MGM called me and he said, before you go in that studio, he said, don't worry, we're going to set fire to that door where that guy won't come out. He said, so come to the office at MGM. And I said, well, shouldn't I go to the studio? It's like, really, no, come here. And I walked into a room and it was full of lawyers. And I said, they said, the slate on the show is all wrong. And I said, well, I don't think we should worry somebody. A slate is where you put the information about a show. It's the thing you see somebody clack when you see a movie. And I said, I don't think that's really a big problem. Oh, no, it's a big problem. And we have to fix it. And, and we have to have all 4 companies. Before the show starts, all 4 companies have to get a credit. So it took about a week to work that out. And for the only time in my entire life, because the thing you normally put ahead of a show is the air date of the show, the length of the show, and what's called a rundown, which gives cue and timing for commercial breaks. And having these 4 slates was confusing the heck out of stations. This was back in the days before satellite. And the communication was done by taking the tapes, making bicycle tapes, and sending them around the country. So ahead of the show, I had to put up a red flashing sign that said, please disregard the following information. And that was ahead of every Thick of the Night broadcast, which is kind of funny when you think of telling somebody not to watch your show, but we weren't saying that. Richard Belzer, the week I got there, had tried to strangle the censor. And I got a call from the floor and they said, come to the booth. Richard has the censor on the floor and his hands around her neck. And I went up there and I said, what's going on? And she was an elderly woman and kind of sweet, and he wasn't really hurting her. He was just teasing her. But she told him that he couldn't do any Nixon jokes. She was a big Nixon fan. Here's Nixon in my career again. And he wanted to do Nixon jokes. So anyway, it didn't work out. But there was a guy that I had on the Mike Douglas show to do his first ever stand-up by the name of Arsenio Hall. And I called Arsenio and I said, Arsenio, do you want to be the announcer on Thick of the Night and replace Richard Belzer? And he said, well, I live in Cleveland. I said, well, we'll get you an apartment in Hollywood. We'll figure something out. Well, turned out that we had to co-sign the apartment rent for him to get it set up, which we did. And Thick of the Night lasted about 1.5 years. And Metro Media got the idea to do the show with Arsenio afterwards. And that's what launched the Arsenio Hall show.
Now, did you work with Claudia Kagan when she worked on that show?
I did not stay with the show because I had another job at that time. I had already taken a consulting job at KingWorld to develop shows and was working on trying to get Oprah launched and Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and Tony Orlando at the time.
Speaking of Tony Orlando, I was mentioning that when you were reconfiguring your computer and the power was going back on there in California, that was back in '86, and we got a little promo that aired on WDIV, which is in Detroit, which at that time was, I believe, Channel 4, and it was a post-Newsweek station. But Tony, who's a dear friend of ours, and of course you too, he people may forget that there was for a blip beyond Tony Orlando and Dawn and everything else he did and all of his millions of albums and songs. He had a show called the Tony Orlando Show for a short period. Tell us about that and what the hope was with that. And you and I were chatting when we were doing a dry run with this last night, that was coming out around the same time Oprah Winfrey's show was, and sort of Oprah just whoosh, took off from there. We have a clip of Tony Orlando's promo as well.
Well, what was going on was I was back with Fred Silverman again, and Fred had put the Tony Orlando and Dawn variety show on as a summer replacement. And it did so well. This is network. It did so well that it ran for 4 or 5 years. And Tony, who had been a regular guest on the Mike Douglas show, wanted to do a talk show. And his agent at the time was the legendary Norman Brokaw, one of the godfathers of the William Morris Agency. And the idea was to do an out-of-town tryout with Chicago with Oprah Winfrey and an out-of-town tryout in Detroit with Tony Orlando and see which show we should launch at KingWorld. And unfortunately for Tony, it was Oprah, but Tony never held it against us because it was the right decision at the time.
And here is that clip from back in 1986, a little promo for
84, actually.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It says 86 on the clip itself, but yeah, 84. All right. In the 80s.
Yeah.
Are the one and only Tony Orlando.
So, the Tony Orlando show is being produced right here in Detroit. That's terrific, Tony.
Thanks, Bernie.
Of course, you're probably only going to have big names on your show.
Oh, we'll have big names, but I'm looking for local acts, too.
Local acts. Local acts. Excuse me a second, Tony.
Sure.
Get it! 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 Get it!
The Tony Orlando Show, weekdays at 4.
Good.
Everybody's getting into the act.
So we did 6 months in Detroit, thinking we were smart. We could do an out-of-town tryout that nobody would see beyond Detroit. What we didn't know was that they stole the signal in Windsor. The only place in the United States where the United States is south
Goes
of
into Canada,
north of
yeah.
Canada. And Windsor took it and put it on the CDC across Canada, and it got to the West Coast. And we were getting calls from people saying, oh, we saw the Tony Orlando show in LA yesterday. But it was a lot of fun. Everybody did that show. Jerry Lewis, Milton Berle, Danny Thomas, you name it. And we had a lot of fun doing that show. Muhammad Ali was on. It was a pretty amazing show.
And he's such a nice guy, too. He's a consummate performer and multi-talented entertainer, Tony Orlando, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, we had moved Oprah to Chicago, and Oprah went on locally in Chicago. And Tony was in Detroit, and it was a choice between the two of them.
And that idea with Oprah Winfrey, of course, who was a news anchor, news reporter. She went through the ranks, Baltimore, WJZ, and then going into Chicago and doing a localized talk show in Chicago, and then having this opportunity to go national. Tell us about that. How did that all come about, where they saw Oprah in Chicago doing local, I think it was WLS Channel 7, and then said, hey, let's see if we can launch this nationally?
There's a wonderful ex-Marine by the name of Dennis Swanson, who was head of the ABC station group. This was the old Cap Cities days. And Roger and Michael King, I get no credit for Oprah. The best thing I did with Oprah is got out of her way. I was executive in charge of production, but I literally, Oprah really knew what she wanted to do and how she wanted to do it. Was always very kind and very nice with me. I took Oprah on the road originally, brought her out to Universal and New York, and got her out of the Chicago studio once I got involved. I was only a consultant in those days. I wasn't yet working for the company in the early 80s. And Roger King saw the possibility with Oprah, moved her to Chicago. She had been with Westinghouse, which is my old Mike Douglas stomping grounds, in Baltimore. And she also tried to be a weather girl, believe it or not, in Nashville. Neither of those things worked. She met Gayle King in Baltimore. And there's a very famous story about how they got snowed in together in a snowstorm, and that's where they bonded and created their amazing friendship. But Oprah went to Chicago for very little money, did a local show with a small staff, brilliant young producer named Debbie DeMeo. and a lawyer that she picked out of the phone book who became her manager, who did very well, let's say, and did the show at WLS in Chicago at that studio until things really took off. And then she built her own studio, and we moved her into her own studio. And what can you say about Oprah? Oprah is iconic and brilliant and just a wonderful lady. And I was lucky to be hanging around in the background.
I remember, I believe the show on WJZ Channel 13 in Baltimore was People Are Talking.
That's right.
And then she would do some of the eyewitness news. And then when People Are Talking is also the name of the show that Tom Bergeron started at in Boston on WBZ.
And Maury
Povich in DC, right?
Yeah, and there was another one.
That was Channel 9, I think.
Peter Ducci's father. It's on Fox.
Oh, yes.
Had a People Are Talking show somewhere.
Steve Ducey.
Steve Ducey. Yeah, he
Steve
had a
Ducey.
show. Yeah, so there are 5 or 6 hosts that came out of that. But
And
Oprah,
American Journal, too, you worked on.
Well, we created American Journal when.
And that was Nancy Glass.
You've asked me a couple of times about what my favorite show is, or I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I'd say the best rescue job I ever did was Inside Edition. Because Inside Edition went on the air originally with David Frost. And David, who's a brilliant man, was having a hard time in life at that point and was just not doing a very good job for a number of reasons. And he had Mike Tyson live on a satellite one night, and it didn't go too well. And the control room phone rang from CBS, and they said, get him out of that chair and put somebody else in. So Bill O'Reilly was our #1 reporter, and we put Bill in the chair. There was no intention to make Bill the host originally, but Bill became the host. And I came up with the idea of moving the show around the country and getting it out of New York, because we couldn't get an audience in New York. Or New York's a tough place to try to start anything. Nobody starts in New York. You end up in New York once you're a hit.
Exactly.
You try to start in New York, good luck. You know,
I think I was fortunate still being able to have my television radio career here in the New York area. Because for people watching, what Ernie's talking about is a lot of times you would, even if you grew up in a major urban area, you would have to go out to other parts of the country and more rural, smaller markets, and then work your way up. And I remember, you've probably heard this before, but I remember a story about how the news directors for the television stations would maybe go down to North Carolina, and they would book a room in a motel. They'd watch the local news and see the people on the local news in the smaller market and take some notes, and then call one of the anchors or reporters and say, hi, I'm so-and-so here in Boston or New York or Chicago or Philadelphia, and we have an offer to bring you to our larger station. But they would go and stay in a motel and watch the local news.
Godfather of eyewitness news is a wonderful man named Frank Magid. He's passed on.
Yes.
And a company called Frank Magid and Associates in Des Moines, Iowa. And I spent a lot of time there doing exactly what you're saying. Every host that I worked with, we took there for what we call host training. Not so much celebrities, not people like Peter Marshall or Leslie Uggams, but people that were maybe only had done a local show and were about to do a national show, and had the opportunity to learn wonderful things from Mr. Magid and his associates.
But I
know you mentioned Rolanda when we started.
Rolanda Watts.
Rolanda filled in for a host that we tried to get up to speed, and we couldn't get him up to speed. And Rolanda came in at the last minute, the 11th hour.
And she had been doing WABC Eyewitness News, Channel 7, right, at the time?
She was sort of the Kamala Harris of the day. She subbed in for the other guy, you know. And people are kind of forgetting that Kamala Harris kind of filled in for Joe Biden. Well, Rolanda stepped in for a guy named Les Brown. And
Les Brown, that's right.
We had a terrific success with Rolanda. She ran 6 years, and I did executive produce that show and spent a lot of time with her because we had a good time. And
great personality, very, very popular studio audience. Les Brown, you reminded me. I interviewed Les Brown on PBS he used to do a lot of PBS specials.
Yeah, still does.
A wonderful guy, a really talented guy. And he talked about, speaking engagements, and I believe he was going off to Philadelphia right after the live shoot we did at PBS for his special. I was interviewing him about the special, and it was live in the studio. And when we were in the green room, he was telling me about, because he wanted me to sort of go in that route as well, in addition to working on television and radio, but also do speaking engagements, things of that nature. And he was showing me some of the figures back then, what you could generate from doing speaking engagements. And there was one in Philadelphia, and then another one, all expenses paid, in London. And let's just say that you can get a little bit more than just a slice of cheesecake with those figures.
Oh, Rolanda did
Nice
a wonderful
guy.
job.
Nice guy.
We built a studio at 76 and First Avenue. It's gone now. It was the original CBS Omnibus studio. Now we're going way back.
Oh, yes.
A show
Right.
called Omnibus. And it started as a movie house and a vaudeville theater. And we did 9 shows out of that studio.
Wow. And then how did the obviously working with Merv Griffin because of Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, for everybody watching who don't know, Merv Griffin, he owned and created those iconic game shows, Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. How did you get involved with that? It's the KingWorld connection?
Yeah, Merv had created both shows in 1983, 84, when I was a consultant to KingWorld, not yet working there full time. The King brothers decided to approach Merv to see if they could buy the syndication rights to Wheel of Fortune, which had failed 2 other times. 20th
That's
Century
right.
Fox failed with it and Paramount failed with it. So Merv thought they were nuts, to be honest with you.
Different
They were
hosts, Bob Goen, and I think
Yeah,
Chuck
they were-
Woolery, and daytime
they were-
versions. And
Right. They were terrific salesmen. The show that Merv created both shows. Merv was a genius. And actually his wife, Julianne, had created Jeopardy. But he created Wheel of Fortune, which was originally just called Hangman and Shopper's Bazaar.
That's right.
And the original wheel was upright. It wasn't on the floor. It was like a wheel you'd see in a casino. And the original host of Wheel of Fortune pilot, the original pilot before it ever started, was Ed Kooky Burns from 77 Sunset Strip. Look him up. Kooky, give me your comb. Remember that?
Wow, that really goes back.
You know what I'm talking about?
That one I don't remember. I remember the Chuck Woolery, Bob Goen.
Well, there was a show called 77 Sunset Strip
yeah.
with Roger Smith and Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.
But I didn't realize the Wheel of Fortune connection with him.
And
Wow.
Ed Burns was he was the car jockey on the show. He was the valet. And he had a hit song. Now we're going back into the 60s, called Kooky, Give Me Your Comb, because he would comb his hair. That was his big thing. He would open the show by combing his hair. And Merv decided to make him the host, and it didn't work out too well. So they replaced him almost immediately with Chuck Woolery. But in 83, Roger King and Michael King got the rights from Merv on a cocktail napkin at a party, paid him $50,000 to create the most successful financial television show in the history of television, Wheel of Fortune.
And still goes today now with Ryan Seacrest and Vanna White. I think Ryan's doing a wonderful job, and I think it was a good choice to bring him in. You've worked with so many people. You mentioned Terry Bradshaw, and of course, Oprah, also working with Billy Crystal and Charles Grodin, too, on the Charles Grodin Show, right?
Yeah. Before we leave Wheel, it's funny because I still stay involved. And I just booked Dionne Warwick on Celebrity Wheel of Fortune that she's taping on Sunday. It'll be on in January or so.
Oh,
and
that's cool. Yeah, you're
and
still.
guess
so
who
you're
the guess
still
who the
working?
host is going to be?
Huh?
Guess who the host is going to be?
Who?
Pat Sajak.
That's right. That's right. I remember they said that he was still going to have involvement in the Celebrity Wheel.
This is the primetime ABC version, so that'll be coming next year.
That is fantastic. That is great news.
But going back to Chuck Grodin, Chuck was a big movie actor and a terrific human being, wonderful guy. He had just done 3 or 4 big movies, but he got married and had a baby. And his wife said to him, God, you do these movies, you have to travel all around the world and you're not going to be a father. So Chuck's mother, who was in her 90s, called me on the phone at KingWorld when I was senior vice president and said, Chuck Grodin needs a talk show. So I met with him and his mother. Believe it or not, his mother came to the meeting. And we gave Chuck Grodin a talk show, which ended up on CNBC. And he got to stay home and have a talk show.
That's right. And it was CNBC was right across the river from Manhattan in New Jersey.
Right.
And so he was coming from, and Phil Donahue, I think, was on CNBC for a time too with a show.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that as well.
Actually, the guy that replaced me at KingWorld when I went on to Comcast, Andy Friendly, was running CNBC at the time, and we're friends. And so we would send him things over from KingWorld that maybe weren't going to work in syndication, but could work in cable. Because don't forget, I started my career when there was no cable. Matter of fact, we won one of the first Cable Ace Awards for a show we did on A&E called the Arts and Entertainment Review.
Yes, right. And
hosted by Robert Klein, comedian Robert Klein, who did a wonderful job.
And for anybody watching who doesn't know that that's what A&E originally, well, that's what it stands for, is Arts and Entertainment Network. And the programming was different. Now, you know, a lot of these networks, Bravo and others, have gone into different types of programming from what the original concept was. You worked with somebody near and dear to all of us, Regis Philbin. Tell us about your wonderful relationship and the opportunities of working with Regis.
Well, when Mike was going off the air, Regis was about to launch a network show. And I couldn't go join him yet. Another producer started it, and here we go again.
Yes.
It's me replacing somebody.
Yeah.
But Regis and I met, and we kind of fell in love with each other and really liked each other. And I did Regis's NBC Network show with the co-host Mary Hart, who had been with me at Westinghouse. She was a co-host of PM Magazine in San Diego. And actually, I met her at the Cowboy Hall of Fame with John Wayne in Oklahoma City when she was a school teacher. We went to her school and got her out of the school and brought her to the set to interview John Wayne.
I mean, what 1 minute you're teaching algebra and then now you're interviewing John Wayne. That's
John Wayne called me in my hotel room at 6 a.m. And when John Wayne calls you, you answer the phone.
Yes.
And he said to me, I'm watching the morning farm report and there's a girl on there and she's terrific and I want her to interview me. So I said, okay. So the station wasn't even open yet.
Yeah.
8 o'clock in the morning, I got the general manager and I said, this woman, Mary Hart, where is she? And he said, well, she's a school teacher. She only comes in. She wants to be a broadcaster someday, but she's a school teacher. So I got a car and a dozen roses and went to the school. This is something you could never do today. I walked into the school right to the principal's office and I said, I want to take Mary Hart to the set of the John Wayne Cowboy Hall of Fame special for her to interview John Wayne. Mary got in the car and off we went. And as they say, the rest is history. And when we were doing the Regis Philbin show,
Ernie Di Massa Jr. touch. See what happens, folks?
Well, I don't know about that, but when we were doing the Regis Philbin show, Regis wanted to move to New York. And I didn't want to go back to New York. I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast with Mike Douglas just a year or two before. And Mary had this other opportunity, which I told her not to take. She had two possible opportunities. One was to work with Jane Fonda and a new company called Carl Lorimar, which was about to sell VHS video cassettes and something called Jane Fonda's Workout, which, if you remember, was the best-selling video cassette of all time back in the day. Or she was going to go take this job on a failed show that had been through 6 hosts and was not doing very well, called Entertainment Tonight. And I said, Mary, I would not take that job at Entertainment Tonight. I think you should go with Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is a wonderful lady. She'll embrace you. You'll have a great career with her. You'll meet great people. Mary did not take my advice. She went to Entertainment Tonight and was there for 30 years. And a little known fact is I almost stole her away. There was a contract dispute at Paramount about 10, 15 years into her tenure. And I almost got her to do Inside Edition instead of Entertainment Tonight.
Could you imagine? Wow. That's something. And I believe weren't her legs insured by Lloyd's of London or
She
something?
had a manager that
$1 million
handled.
or
She had a manager that handled herself and Suzanne Summers, and he came up with a publicity gimmick that he could insure their legs for $6 million each. And of course, back in the day, this is before the internet and social media, a press release went out that these two women had their legs insured by Lloyd's of London.
and everybody thought that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
That's
it was,
amazing.
there was actually a policy. He got a policy written. I mean, it was real. It was just silly.
You know, speaking of interesting things that have happened in the broadcasting industry, when you were doing Inside Edition and involved in Inside Edition, there was that iconic moment, of course, that has gone viral and half the planet has seen it, when Bill O'Reilly was reading something on prompter, and that's where the whole we'll do it live scenario came from. And you were actually there as that was happening. What was actually happening? You see his frustration, he gets mad, he storms off the
First
set.
of all,
we'll
let
do
me
it live.
explain.
What was happening?
When you do a television show, you do something called a Christmas reel or a year-end reel for a party. And it was never intended for this particular tape to get out to the public. This was something you keep under the wraps inside the house. This is behind the scenes you don't show. But when Bill worked with the crew on the show, there were a couple of people on the crew that weren't happy with him. And somebody, to get even with Bill, decided to put this out on the internet. And what was going on was, back in the day, this is the early days of MTV. And again, cable was just starting up. And music stars, to get their new song put out, would do what was called a music video. You don't see it anymore. It's too expensive and it's just not done. And those music videos were given an exclusive run to go on some particular show. And Inside Edition had started to catch hold. We were doing very well. And Sting agreed to give us his new song. And the idea was to run the song under the 2.5-minute credits on the show at the end of the show, and you'd see Sting and get to hear his new song. Bill did not understand the concept. So I was in the control room with the director and the producer, John Tomlin. And there's a thing called an IFB that we use in television. An IFB is that little earpiece. And you'll see very unsophisticated people sometimes talk to it because, you know, the IFB is where the director or the producer, you see it on
Sometimes
every
you see
show
the
on
cord
television.
hanging behind them, and
Yeah. And the director will be giving them information if they're doing live news or there's some information to come. So in the IFB, John was explaining to Bill that we were going to do this Sting video to take us home. He used the words take us home. And Bill had no idea what that meant, not being from showbiz, being from a news background. Take us home is usually the way you say to somebody who's a musician, play us off the air. Play some song that's going to go on until we go off the air. So the stage manager, and to get even with Bill, took the Christmas tape, and probably Howard Stern picked up on this Do It Live, because the show was done live via satellite at sometimes, and sometimes we pre-taped it and didn't do it live. So this was a bit of a snit that Bill threw when he could not understand what it was we were trying to do, and something the public never should have seen.
But boy, did they, huh?
Yeah, no kidding.
I wonder if he ever had a reaction to it. I wonder what his reaction to it going public.
Oh, he was not happy. I can tell you. I've talked to Bill. He was not happy that it got out. Are you going to play it?
No, I don't have that. No, but that's.
Well, just go on YouTube. Just go on YouTube.
Oh,
and
it's
look up
there. Yeah.
Bill O'Reilly Goes Nuts, and you can see. Don't play it in a room with children because there's a censored and uncensored version.
Another opportunity was Candid Camera as well, huh?
I had known Alan Funt. Believe it or not, Durwood Kirby, who was the host of Candid Camera with Alan Funt on CBS way back in the 60s, had an emergency appendectomy. And they called us in Philadelphia and asked if Mike could drive up to New York in a limousine and fill in for Durwood Kirby. So we all got to meet Alan Funt. And I became quite fond of Alan Funt, and we became friends. And when I was at KingWorld, we had a lot of cash, and we started buying rights to a lot of shows. And one of the shows we bought the rights to was Candid Camera. And we decided to redo Candid Camera with Dom DeLuise. And executive producer was Vin DeBona, that created America's Funniest Home Videos. And we created a new syndicated version of Candid Camera. Unfortunately, it was nowhere near as funny as the original version, and I'll admit that. Alan Funt was the master, and we only ran 1 year, but we did a full year, and we had a lot of fun.
And hasn't it come back and again with his son?
Peter Funt, who's Alan's son, got the rights back when KingWorld was sold to CBS. I left the company when CBS Paramount bought the company. I had the opportunity to go over to Comcast. I'm a Philadelphian, and Comcast was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast. And I kind of knew that they were going to try to buy a big group. I had no idea they were going to buy Universal and NBC, but they did. And we had a company called C3 that I worked at with a gentleman who had been president of Disney Television, Rich Frank, and my agent from William Morris left William Morris. And the three of us went over and worked for a company called C3 that did some of the first Comcast shows on the West Coast. But Alan Funt got the rights back and all that crazy merger and acquisition stuff. And his son Peter is still doing Candid Camera.
That's right. Yeah. There's another
Alan
cool
wrote
photo we
Alan
got.
wrote
Right?
a couple of textbooks. Oh, there's me with Miss Piggy.
Going back to Mike
I'm
Douglas. Yeah.
looking very tired. I don't think I had slept in 2 days.
What was happening here?
We were with Jim Henson and Frank Oz at Leeds Castle in London, where they were taping The Muppets. And this was the Mike Douglas show with the Muppets, Miss Piggy over my shoulder and Fozzie. And on that particular show, we had a group called the Boomtown Rats. Do you know who I'm talking about?
I've heard of, but tell our audience.
The Boomtown Rats was led by a fellow by the name of Bob Geldorf. Bob Geldorf is the one who created Don't We Know It's Christmas, and created an incredible guy. Their original song was called I Don't Like Mondays, which was kind of a weird song about I don't even want to get into it. It was weird. And, but he was brilliant, and who knew? I mean, he was like 18 or 19 years old on the set with us, and we said, oh, here's another rocker, let him do his song, you know. And we had no idea of the depth of this gentleman or what he would create.
We have another photo we want to pull up too. Look at this one. What's hot? What's not?
This was a storefront. There was a very famous place called the Sherman Oaks Galleria. And I had an idea, along with a brilliant guy named Bill Hillier. Bill Hillier created PM Magazine for Westinghouse.
That's right.
And we did a show with Fred Willard and Melanie Chardov. Melanie Chardov was the host of she was one of the rep group on an ABC show called Fridays, which was sort of the ABC version of Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Ran about 10 years.
Yeah.
And we had a wonderful time with Fred and Melanie doing it was a show about going across America, talking about in retail, what's hot and what's not.
Coming up with all these great ideas and, just keeping it going.
That studio was actually in the mall. And Fred would go out with a microphone and interview people while they were shopping. He'd go over to Macy's or go over to a store, and we built that studio inside the mall. We soundproofed it and took an old store and made it into a TV studio.
That is so cool. Got another clip going back to our friend Regis Philbin. This was in 1991 at NatB. And did you want to mention anything about that one?
Well, I was already at KingWorld. You'll see me in this clip in the KingWorld booth and with Vanna. And Regis was doing his show in New York. NAPTE was the National Association of Television Programming Executives. It's still around, but it's not as important. 200 television stations in America. And back in the day, we had to go to each city and sell a television station to get a show on the air. So we had 14 or 15 salesmen. There would be this national convention every year, and it was a big deal. And Regis starts this particular clip out because he's talking about the oncoming advent of this new thing called HD television. We were leaving the 4:3 format and going to the wide format. And he comes into our booth to meet Vanna.
Whatever happened to the television code of the National Association of Broadcasters? The stations would adhere to and proudly display when they were signing off, we are a station that, coincides with that television code. You don't see that anymore.
Well, Jim, what happened is when the FCC lost control because of broadcast, once you go to cable, people are paying for things to be in their home. So it's a whole different world. Broadcast, as FCC writes, there's still a broadcast law called a 317, where as a producer, you must guarantee that you're only doing editorial content and you're not putting commercial content in editorial content. That kind of got really mixed up when infomercials started. And actually, there's two things going on right now. There's a thing called FAST TV. Are you familiar?
Tell us about that.
FAST TV. You can Google it. It's free advertiser-supported television. And what it is shows being created by the advertisers. Like back in the early days when Stop Ed and Old Gold cigarettes would dance across the stage, or Revlon would have a big commercial sponsor. We're going back to that. There's also the broadcasters to fight back against streaming and some of the other problems. This is the first month in the history of television that broadcast and streaming are at an equal footing. You've got 50% of the people watching streaming and 50% watching broadcast television. And it's going in the wrong direction for broadcast. So broadcasters have created something called Next Gen TV, NEXTGEN TV. Are you familiar with that?
That I've heard of, yeah.
You can Google that. And they're going to be creating smart TVs with a Next Gen smart TV interface in it. So the broadcaster can actually stream their broadcast.
Pretty
anyway,
ingenious.
Yeah. This goes back, this particular clip goes back, I guess, about 30 some years.
It's 1991, yeah, with Regis. Take a look, everybody.
So these are some of the sights and sounds of the NAPTI convention. Well, there they are, that happy couple. You've seen them a million times now. Pat Sajak and Vanna White. We'll see if they are at home today. Oh, my gosh, we're in luck. There is Vanna White, all a part of the wild NAPTI scene. Wearing pink today. Hi, Vanna. How you doing?
How are
nice
you?
to see you. Well, how is the old married lady?
She's great.
Oh, yeah, she looks pretty good.
Thanks.
Everything agreeing with you?
Absolutely.
Really?
Couldn't be happier.
Made a big change in your life?
Yeah.
Is he here today?
No.
He let you come down alone with all of these. Look, fan over here. What do you animals want? Get back. This is a married woman. Please. No big changes in your life. Pat Sajak isn't jealous. Everything's okay?
Everything's great.
Oh, that's good. Hey, you've heard a lot about high density, high definition television. Well, that's what it looks like. If we can get a better look, it's drawing quite a crowd here. And as you can see, the quality of the picture is, well, it certainly is improved over what we have in our homes, isn't it? Colors are so vivid. That's the future, folks. Take a look at it. You'll be seeing it soon.
So I guess that proves I'm 6'6", right, when you saw me in that clip.
It certainly does. And the picture next to Fred Astaire did as well.
I think I'm shrinking, though, Jim.
That happens sometimes as well. I don't think there's anything we can really do about that other than maybe, adjust our seats higher or something like that. But
my tennis
we
serve
also
is
have this. This is something quite special. Tell us about this 10th anniversary Wheel of Fortune.
Well, in the early 90s, we did the 10th anniversary of Wheel of Fortune, and that's signed by Vanna and Pat and Merv. And we threw a beautiful dinner and a cocktail party in the Beverly Hilton, the same room where they do the Golden Globes.
Oh,
and
yeah.
recorded it and did a special that evening. And that's on my shelf of memorabilia. It's one of my favorite memories from Wheel in the early days.
So many iconic moments over the years that you've been a part of, my friend. It's really incredible. Here is Planet Hollywood, Beverly Hills.
We, at Comcast, were working with the owners of Planet Hollywood. And we did the opening of the Planet Hollywood in Beverly Hills back in, I guess that would have been around, let's see. I'd say that's probably 99 or 98, somewhere in that area. Probably 1999. It could have been 2000. And we were launching a thing called Home Team with Fox, which was bringing Terry Bradshaw from CBS over to Fox. CBS had been the NFL football bailiwick, and Terry got a huge contract to join Fox, where he's been for, I guess, 25 years now, or 26 years.
Yeah. And CBS, I think, was,
and of course, Rupert Murdoch.
Pat Summerall and John Madden at the time.
Yeah, Rupert Murdoch stole the CBS NFL franchises and brought them onto Fox.
And brought over to Fox. Hmm.
And then stole the host too.
And so it's the nature of this industry, folks. If you're learning for the first time, instant recall was something else too that was in the mix over the years, huh?
Instant recall started out originally as an idea called Only Yesterday, and it sounded too old. And the brilliant ABC newsman Ob Weston, the guy who worked on Nightline and many other shows and ABC News, worked with Rune Arledge, came to KingWorld with John Palmer. John Palmer, of course, the very famous television anchor. And everybody said, gee, Only Yesterday sounds really terrible. It sounds like it's going to be, So we created a show called Instant Recall. And the idea was to take news stories and update them. So we took news stories from the ABC library, the vast ABC library, and we created a current story. We came out of an idea. The Oprah shows that did the best were the Oprah shows where a guest came back to the show after the first show had aired. And we got to see what happened 6 months later or a year later. Because you remember the early days of Oprah, there was not a lot of celebrities, it was a lot of civilians. And we did that with civilian news stories on this show called Instant Recall. And John Palmer was just a delight to work with. And that was one of the 9 shows we did out of that now gone studio at 76 and First. It's now a condominium building.
You also traveled to Europe on behalf of Scientific Games to help devise television concepts from state-run lottery enterprises throughout the world as a board member of ITV Games, right?
Yeah, this company was international lotteries were trying to figure out why television did so well in the United States and not so well in other countries. It's kind of flipped because, interestingly, game shows now come from Europe to the United States. A lot of the concepts that we see as American game shows actually started in Europe.
That's
Back
right.
when I was doing this, which was around 2000, 2001, they were looking to develop shows. So we developed shows. Lottery shows require, so there are 3 rules in a game show that you have to have. You have to have rooting, meaning you pick a contestant that you want to root for. You have to learn something or get some knowledge out of it. And you have to feel like you didn't waste your time after you watched it. Well, lotteries require exactly the opposite. Somebody that doesn't speak English can win the lottery, or somebody that speaks fluent Spanish can win the lottery. But they don't have to have any knowledge because they've got a lottery ticket. So if you create a game show, you can't have any knowledge be the base of the game show. So it's really a very different kind of challenge than creating a normal game show.
Tell us about, you're president of Vista Media and the incredible work you're doing through Vista.
Well, it's my own company. I'm on the board of several charities, but the current one is called the Lucy Pet Foundation. And my dear friend, that was my drummer, believe it or not, on many of my variety shows back in the day, got into the pet food industry with Dick Van Patten. If you remember, Dick Van Patten was the father on 8 is Enough.
Yeah.
They created a huge company together called Natural Balance Pet Foods that they ran for 30 years. They sold it to another company, and he decided to give back by starting a charity called the Lucy Pet Foundation. And he's now launched a food called Lucy Pet Food to support the charity. But we do free spay and neuters and vaccine clinics. One of the terrible things about America is because we don't spay and neuter enough, we kill 6 to 7 million perfectly adoptable dogs and cats every year in the United States. A lot of countries don't do that because they require spay and neuter. So we created a free spay and neuter traveling RV with a full surgery suite inside it. And I'm quite proud of that. It's really terrific.
What was it like that when you got that Emmy? What was that feeling like for you?
Well, my shows have been nominated hundreds of times.
Yeah.
My shows have actually won about 20 Emmys, but I was not the recipient of those Emmys. I only have one that's still with me, and that's the Emmy behind me, which is from the Regis Philbin Show, the network show, not the syndicated show. And it's just been a wonderful being part of the Academy. I also accepted, along with Woody Frazier, the Mike Douglas Lifetime Achievement Award, which unfortunately we got it for Mike while he was still alive, but they didn't present it until he had passed. So Woody and I actually accepted. There's the 2 of us accepting that Mike Douglas Lifetime Achievement, and they made a one-time only Crystal Emmy for Mike.
Wow.
Which is what I have in my hand there at the Emmys a few years back.
Very special. Very, very special.
So one of the big projects, I don't know how much time you have left, Jim.
I was going to ask, do you still, is there any contact with the Mike Douglas family, the siblings, any of the descendants?
That's going to lead us right to the current project.
Perfect. That was my segue.
Yeah, very nice segue, Jim. Yes, I've stayed in touch with Kelly Douglas, who's Mike's daughter, that I've known since she was 5 or 6. And she's a terrific lady. And I represent the Mike Douglas estate, Mike Douglas Entertainments. We just made a deal to do a film. And we also just recently made a deal to release some clips from the last 100 shows. And we're talking to some streaming services about the possibility of putting some of the Westinghouse Mike Douglas shows back on the air.
That's going to be
back
great.
In the afternoon at 3 or 4 o'clock. But the project that we're involved in right now is called Daytime Revolution. And a brilliant young director named Eric Nelson came to us. And he said, I've got an idea where I want to take the 5 John and Yoko shows that Mike did. And back in the day, John and Yoko co-hosted 5 shows with us in Philadelphia 52 years ago in 1972. It'll be 53 years in February. And he had a concept to create a show, a film, not a documentary so much, because a lot of documentaries are full of talking heads and, people that weren't there. He said, I only want people in this film that were in the studio with Mike, John, and Yoko. And he created a brilliant film. You can find the trailer if you go to YouTube and look up Daytime Revolution. The film will be premiering on what would have been John Lennon's 84th birthday, which is October 9th, and actually is world premiering tomorrow at the Hamptons Film Festival in the Hamptons, New York.
That's right, out east on Long Island. And then there is the event that you'll be at in LA, right?
We have an LA premiere on the 9th in North Hollywood at the Lindley Theater across the street from the Television Academy, of all places. And it's playing in New York on 34th Street, I believe, at the cinema there. It's a 4-plex. Is it called The Landmark?
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic. We actually have the 2-minute, 8-second trailer here that we can show.
Sure.
Yeah, Daytime Revolution. As far as the name, coming up with Daytime Revolution, how did you come up with that?
That was all Eric. I'm an executive producer on this film, and I'm sort of an on-screen narrator. From time to time, you'll hear me in the promo. But Eric's really the brilliance behind this film. This was all him. And what I did was very little. I just did what Eric asked me, and it's been pretty exciting, a very exciting project.
Here's the official trailer, courtesy of our friend Ernie, here for Daytime Revolution. Take a look, folks.
I'm 31 now, and I've grown up in many ways, and you have to be more politically aware in a day and age like this. It's almost impossible to close your eyes to it.
It was a time of considerable fracturing.
And you're reading the newspapers that the war's over, but the war's not over.
You have to understand where the Mike Douglas Show sat in culture.
Here is John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
It was the most popular show in daytime television.
When President Nixon leaves for Peking on Thursday,
Yoko said, we're doing this show on Mike Douglas. We're having Bobby Seale and Jerry Rubin. And I'm going like, what?
Here is Ralph Nader.
Is he running for president?
No.
John Lennon and Yoko Ono didn't want us to talk about their music. That spoke for itself.
What would you like to talk about this week, John?
Love, peace, communication,
drugs.
Drugs, anything.
When I got to the studio, I got a glimpse of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I said, oh my goodness, this is exciting.
They did have an agenda, and the agenda had to do with making the world better.
Yeah, it was something they were trying to get away with.
Well, young people are known to be cynical, and I say to them, nobody's smart enough to be a pessimist.
Imagine there's no heaven. People tend to think that somebody will save them, and there's only people can save us, only us all deciding to do something about anything, whatever it is. Just even making that decision that I want to do something is a start. Imagine all the people living for today.
Something
So
quite
it's-
special.
Yeah, it's a very exciting project. Ralph Nader has been a friend of mine for almost 55 years. And I called Ralph and asked him to do this film, and Ralph's going to be 91.
That's hard to
Still-
believe.
Still sharp as a tack and still wonderful. And he's just so brilliant in the film. And there's so many memories it brought back for me of
Yeah.
being there. I was a 24-year-old kid. And amazingly, the first concert I ever saw was the Beatles live. I was in Philadelphia. I had an aunt that worked in city government, and she became assistant city representative. And the Beatles were coming to Philadelphia, and I got third row seats in Convention Hall with 17,000 girls. And I saw the Beatles in September 6, 1964, with no dream that I would ever, 8 years later, be sitting in a dressing room telling John Lennon what he was going to be doing on a talk show. And pretty amazing. And
On the
actually,
Mike Douglas show.
at the premiere we're doing in LA next Wednesday on the 9th, we're going to have two of the guests that I haven't seen in 50 years that were on that show.
Wow.
We're going to do a Q&A at the after the movie, and we get together once every 50 years.
Right. Nice round numbers. Well, here's another round number: 3,000 miles off Broadway. Tell us about this.
Well, this is a reality show that in its incubation, I had an idea to do a show like Vanderpump Rules, but instead of having kids, instead of just having kids that are waiters and bartenders, I wanted kids with talent. So I found this hidden gem, and literally that's what it's called. It's the Gem Theater. It's a 100-year-old theater. It's in Garden Grove, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, about 30 miles south of Hollywood. And there are 40 or 50 kids. And when I say kids, they're in their early 20s. It's not a children's theater. But 7 of our major movie stars got their start in Little Theater. Everybody from Emma Thompson to Hugh Jackman, you name it. And the idea here is to take these producers. There's an impresario who's the producer, who's very much like Alan Carr, if you remember who Alan Carr was. Alan Carr was the producer of Grease. He was a very famous, matter of fact, one of his clients was in one of the clips we showed. In that Don Rickles clip, that was Paul Williams, the songwriter. And the fellow that runs this place, Damian Lorton, is a brilliant, brilliant artistic director. He's got a partner named Nicole Casioso, who is an actress who has done the Patsy Cline Always Patsy on Broadway and off Broadway, and won a Theater Guild Award. And they take these kids and they train them. And the idea is not to make money with this theater, but to see who can go on and have a professional career in the business. And they've had, over the 10 years they've been doing it, 40 kids that are now making a living in show business, which is not easy to do, as we both know.
You know, when you think about it, growing up initially in Philadelphia, did you ever think that the career would take this trajectory and turn into these extraordinary experiences and all these opportunities that you've had an opportunity to be a part of? That, again, when you look back at it, we're just scratching the surface. There's so many different things that you are involved in and other types of projects and shows and organizations. But did you ever think when you were that kid growing up in Philly that this is what it was to be?
You know when it hit me, Jim? I'll tell you when it hit me. I was sitting in a theater watching Forrest Gump. And every time I would watch Tom Hanks in a scene where they would put him into a scene with John Kennedy, I met John Kennedy. They'd have these scenes of a life. And I thought, oh my God, I have those scenes in my life. But I never really sat down and said, these are 3,000 people that I met. It just kind of happens, I kind of go from one thing to another, call it luck, call it intuition, call it being in the right place at the right time. It just kind of happened.
And the wall, that beautiful wall behind you where that Emmy is just a little section of all of those memories, huh? It's an iconic wall. I'm sort of Edward R. Murrow, and we're now going into the home of Ernie Di Massa Jr.
Well, there's everything on that wall from Dr. Aldo Gucci, the original Dr. Gucci that the movie was made about. That's on the Mike Douglas Show. There's just over my shoulder there's Sammy Davis playing drums on the Mike Douglas Show. That's a picture from Hollywood Squares of Jim J. Bullock, Shadow Stevens, Joan Rivers, and John Davidson on the John Davidson version of the Mike Douglas Show. There's Terry Bradshaw in the very middle of that picture, wearing a blonde fright wig doing a 70s throwback show. I mean, there's just all kinds of wonderful memories on that wall.
Absolutely. You mentioned, of course, Hollywood Squares. And what was it like working on that fabulous series as well?
I give all the credit to the rebirth of Hollywood Squares to Rick Rosner. Rick Rosner is a brilliant producer. He created Chips, if you know Chips.
Oh, yes, sure.
For 10 years, Chips was the only show that NBC Network had in the top 10 shows. They didn't have any shows. Chips was the show. It was Eric Estrada. It was, Larry Wilcox. It was, and Rick, who's just a genius, had been an associate producer and a producer on the Mike Douglas Show before my time. He was there prior to '69, but he knew of me, and we knew each other from reunions and other things. And he asked me if I could, once again, replace a producer that wasn't working out and come in and help him with Hollywood Squares. So we put together a great team, and Harry Friedman, the brilliant writer that had done the Peter Marshall Hollywood Squares, who went on to become the producer of Wheel and Jeopardy for 25 years, was with us. And it was just a brilliant, wonderful group of people. There's a clip on YouTube of me saying goodbye on Hollywood Squares because, once again, I left that show early to go take another job. I would often have 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. Probably why I'm still not married, because my wife finally said, this is too much and you're married to your show business and I'm taking off. So things happen in life and you just have to be ready for them.
You weren't the creator of Divorce Court, were you?
No, but I certainly spent enough time there.
It's really amazing. What are some other things? And again, you're involved, immersed in many different organizations and on the board of this and that within the industry and outside the industry, and have all the accolades and the love and awards from the industry. But it's the passion and the drive you have to celebrate and to entertain and to preserve everything that, we have grown to enjoy over these many, many years. And as we look back and just sprinkle going down memory lane, some of your contributions in this epic industry that is crazy and unpredictable and sometimes frustrating, but fabulous and amazing and tremendous. It really is a story. I don't know. Are you going to write a book? Is there a memoir in the offing?
No, I was writing a book, and then I thought nobody's going to want to read a book. So I came up with an idea. I've got an idea that I'm thinking about, and I'm working on it. And it's a way to make it video. It's a way to make it modern.
Right.
It's a way to tie it together. The story I'm going to tell you right now, probably the proudest moment in my entire career, is something that had nothing to do with show business. But because of show business, I was able to do it. And way back when I was in college, I was a college athlete. I played 3 years of varsity tennis, tried to play basketball in the Big Five in Philadelphia, but wasn't good enough. But I had friends that were getting drafted and going to Vietnam. And 2 of my dear friends in college were killed in Vietnam. I was lucky because I was a college athlete. I had a deferment. Something came along called the draft lottery, and I didn't have to serve. But I always felt very guilty about the fact that these 2 young men lost their lives. So years later, in 2006, I was approached by a group of veterans who said to me, we want to start a charity After 9/11, many men joined the military, and we lost a lot of lives. And we had 2,000 orphans and widows that were not being taken care of by the government, much like what goes on today. When the military became a non-conscription military, you sign a contract when you go into the military. And if you're a 17-year-old in Mississippi, you might sign a totally different contract than somebody in New York. And the contract might not have a death benefit. And what happens is that these women that are usually in their early 20s and are on a military base somewhere are thrown off the base in 30 days. They've got 2 little children that are under the age of 5. And they have to go home to grandma and grandpa in a double wide in Arkansas or somewhere and make a life for themselves. So these guys, these brilliant guys, a guy named Roy White, who was a pilot at the time, an Air Force pilot, and became a pilot for Southwest Airlines, approached me through a woman named Patricia Marshall and said, would you help us start a charity called Snowball Express? And I said, well, what's Snowball Express? And they said, well, and if you go on YouTube and look up Snowball Express, how it all began, how it all started, you'll see the video I made. I decided to make a video that would help launch the charity and help get celebrities interested in the charity. And the first celebrity I showed it to was Gary Sinise. And I don't have to tell you what a wonderful man he is. He got it right away. So Snowball Express started with these humble beginnings. We had 900 widows and orphans come to California. The Oakley Corporation gave us their world headquarters, and we did a 4-day visit. And we brought in TAPS, which is the Tragedy Assistance Program. And these are all what's called Gold Star families, meaning that every family has lost a member to the military, in the military. And we put psychologists and psychiatrists together with them, gave the women, there were a few men that had lost their wives, and we gave them an opportunity to bond and spend some time together. And the most important thing was seeing these children smile. These children had the opportunity now to be in a place where they felt safety. And so that organization started in 2006. It was adopted by Gary Sinise about 4 years ago. It's now part of the Gary Sinise Foundation.org. And Gary, who now, back then, I had to raise $250,000 because the head of Oakley had put all those plane flights to bring those people in from all over the world, Germany and everywhere else, on his credit card and his expense account at Oakley. And we had to pay Oakley back.
Yeah.
But we did it. We raised it. He didn't get fired. We raised it. They didn't know he was doing it. So, yeah. So we raised the money. And Gary, we started a relationship with Disney. And the event now happens at Disney World in December before Christmas. And Gary is just brilliant and wonderful and just a wonderful man. But it's probably the thing I'm proudest of in my whole life, that we were actually able to give something back.
It's what it's all about, right, Ernie? To have an opportunity to do that. And you've been so good at doing that over the years in your career as you were making the magic and assisting others to make the magic. You've always been cognizant of what it's all about and what it really means, and being in touch with people and inspiring and motivating. Have you ever, you may have done this, and with all the research I've done for this episode, if I may have missed this, but have you ever taught? Have you ever taught, in school or at colleges, lectures, things of that nature? And is this something that you would want to do if you haven't?
I've never taught, and at this age, but when I was working on my master's degree, Westinghouse paid for my master's and my PhD work. I did not finish my PhD because I was too busy making television shows. So I never did the work, but I never did the dissertation. But while I was teaching assistant and working on my master's, I taught at a junior college. And I've also taught tennis back in the day in colleges. But no, I've never, it's been asked to me a couple of times. I've guest lectured in other people's courses, but no, I've never really done that because I'm still too busy.
You're busy doing the actual work itself.
And I've got this movie coming out this weekend.
How's your tennis game? You still play tennis?
I still play tennis. I had a little bit of a knee injury about a year ago, but I'm back on the court and hitting again. And no, not as competitive as I used to be. I used to play with 30 and 40-year-olds, but
Did you ever play with any of the celebs? Johnny Carson was a lover of tennis.
I played tennis in Johnny Carson's court in Zuma, and I have a great story about Johnny Carson I could tell next time.
I would love to hear that.
And I played with Tracy Austin. I played with Jimmy Connors. I've hit with a lot of people, John McEnroe. But I played pretty well when I was young. I'm not playing as well now, obviously. I'm not young.
What's the Johnny Carson story?
Well, it's a long story that involves David Letterman. But
where he wanted Letterman to be his replacement?
Replacement, yeah.
Right.
And it didn't happen, as we know. And strangely enough, a guy that worked on the Mike Douglas, everything comes back to the Mike Douglas show sooner or later. There are 200 people in show business that came out of the Mike Douglas show, and their tentacles go out everywhere. So Rick Ludwin, who had been on the Mike Douglas show with me as a producer, took over NBC, and he's the one that wanted Jay Leno instead of David Letterman. And David, if you remember at the time, was pretty upset. There were a couple of movies made about it. There was a book written about it. So I called David, who I had known. I had David on the Mike Douglas show. You want to see a funny clip sometime? Go on YouTube and look up David Letterman and Michael Keaton dancing on the Mary Tyler Moore variety show.
Oh, remember that show? Yes, right.
She had a CBS variety show.
Yeah.
And the rep company, Michael Keaton, who, by the way, his real name is Michael Douglas, had to change his name because of Mike Douglas.
That's right.
David Letterman didn't want to dance on the show because they really weren't dancers. You'll find a clip. There is a clip of them dancing, believe it or not. So David would hide in the Mike Douglas green room to stay away from the choreographer. We were all at CBS Television City. They were in the studio. They took over the Carol Burnett studio when Carol wasn't there. And I got to know David, put him on the show, and we stayed friends through most of his run. I actually put some things on the David Letterman show when it was on CBS. And he was leaving NBC. And we at KingWorld had a lot of money, and we knew that we could make a deal with the ABC stations in what eventually became the Jimmy Kimmel time slot. And my idea was to have Johnny Carson executive produce the David Letterman show on ABC. And we got pretty far down the line in those talks, but unfortunately, an agent and a lawyer got involved and got it all screwed up. But David Letterman would have been on ABC against Jay Leno.
I had heard that. And then he, of course, went to CBS.
Right. CBS took the show that they had out and put Letterman in. And then Letterman brought Tom Snyder over because NBC let Tom Snyder go. Tom Snyder, who was an anchor in Philadelphia when I did the Mike Douglas show.
That's right.
He was one floor above us anchoring the news. Matter of fact, Tom and I were the same height. And he would always say to me in the hallway, "You're too tall. Get out of here."
While those color teenies fly through the air. Yeah.
Wonderful guy.
He was amazing. He was on WABC Eyewitness News Channel 7 in New York as well. The Tomorrow Show on NBC. And of course, there was that whole Joan Rivers and Johnny Carson never talking because she went over to Fox. And there was thought that she would also be a successor to Johnny as well, possibly.
That was another weird story because Fox hired the wrong executive producer for the Joan Rivers show. And they told her they were going to either fire the executive producer or cancel her show. And unfortunately, the executive producer they wanted to fire was her husband, Edgar. And she said, "I'm not going to let you fire my husband." So she quit and she walked out of there. And we hired her as the center square on Hollywood Squares.
That's right.
And paid her a lot of money. And you want to hear something really weird? The only studio that we could find to do Hollywood Squares in that fall was the same studio where she had done the Joan Rivers show. And she had to walk back into that same studio. And unfortunately, Edgar had committed suicide over that summer.
Right.
And poor Joan, I felt so badly for Joan. We became very good friends. And I met Joan when I was 21 and she was 36. So I knew Joan my whole career. And I'm still very
familiar with Larchmont, New York. Yeah.
Melissa is still very friendly. Matter of fact, Melissa helped me do a big benefit I did called the Celebration of Heroes where we honored the doctors and nurses and emergency workers that saved lives during COVID.
That's incredible. Yeah. And Melissa's working on something, I believe, coming up, celebrating her mother as well. A big shindig.
Yeah. She's appearing, matter of fact, down here in Orange County at a repertory theater, South Coast Repertoire, on the 19th, because there's a one-man play about her mother called Joan Rivers.
I want to let folks know, too, if they also want to learn more about the Lucy Pet Foundation, they can go to lucypetfoundation.org. And also, if you want to learn about Snowball Express, you can go to snowballexpress.org as well. Really fantastic conversation, my friend. And again, good things come to those who wait. You and I can chat for days about this beloved industry that we're in, you're one of those people that helped pave the way for a lot of the rest of us who have been hosts and do television and radio in all different shapes and forms and on air and on camera and behind the scenes. And the ins and outs and what it takes and some of these amazing stories that you've shared, which we really appreciate your authenticity, your openness, your kindness to share it as well. And the porch light is going to be on for a long time for you, Ernie. You are welcome back here at the Jim Masters Show series at any time. And I thoroughly enjoyed all of this time. And,
Thank you.
What would you say to somebody who's watching us who wants to now go into these industries in this day and age? We're in a TikTok 6-second video world now. What would you say to somebody who loves the way things were and maybe reveres all of that and is hoping that some of that will still exist and that's what they want to go into? What would you say to somebody who wants to dive in now?
I would say find a mentor. Find someone who's done it, someone who's currently doing it. Offer to work for free if you have to, or a little pay, and learn the industry. Pick an area that you want to work in. If it's music, if it's variety, if it's scripted, find someone that can be a college professor. It can be somebody currently working in the industry. Believe it or not, handwritten letters still do go a really long way. I would much more respond to a handwritten letter that arrived on my desk than I would to an email or a text message. It's an easy way to open the door for yourself and look for people that you know that may know somebody. Social media is terrific for that. Use your social media to meet somebody. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to them. Don't just rely on text messages and written words, and get on the phone and introduce yourself. I know it's hard for young people because they're not used to it, but some of the best relationships I have in my life are people that I met for years on the phone before I ever met them in person. So, and I must say on the way out, I'd really like your audience to Google search Daytime Ocean and look for that trailer and look for a theater near them where it's going to be opening on the 9th, and stand by for the Blu-ray and the streaming, which will be announced soon. And it's really full circle for my career because it goes back to the very beginning.
It really does. You and I were talking about that, all back to Philadelphia, your hometown, and the cheesesteaks and Mike Douglas, I tell you, and the Phillies and all the rest. Oh, look at that.
This is the what we called the Bippy from the Mike Douglas show. That's my ring lights reflecting in it, so I got to turn it the other way. But this was from the Mike Douglas show way back when. And if you look at the wall behind the set, it's covered with these, what we called Bippies, which were also became an asterisk. And the reason we did it is that people would come on the show. Back in the day, there was no social media, there was no internet. A photographer would take a picture, it would be on the front page of the New York Times or the Philadelphia Bulletin or the LA Times, with no credit to the Mike Douglas show. So by creating that, Ken Philo, the art director, was brilliant. He created that wall full of these little circles and little flowers. It was actually adopted by Laugh-In and then the dating game show. Because that, if you saw that in the background, you knew the picture came from the Mike Douglas show.
And it also had a modern texture to it. representing the time period. It's very much reflective of the feeling and the essence of the time. I always notice that on the set.
And this is one of the actual ones that came off the wall. When we tore the set down and built a new studio, you can see this was encased in plastic. And the studio was there from 65 to 72, July to July. And this is one of the pieces that came right off the wall.
Incredible, really. Thank you, sir, for all of your contributions to the industry.
Sorry about the glitch, but
hey, you and I are professionals. Look, you plug back in, and here you are, and we roll along, right? So those are some of the most special moments sometimes when you have to do something. I've had so many times on live television and live radio, and you have as well, where I've been the one on camera on air, and boy, Stretch, Phil. I remember one time I was on PBS and I was with my co-host, and my co-host happened to be the national programming director for that particular station where we were filming, or actually broadcasting live. And he was actually, his name is Larry Rifkin, dear friend. He was, he's still with us, but he's the guy who brought Barney to television.
Oh, okay.
And his daughter, they went to a video store in Connecticut, and there was a videotape on the rack. They brought it home, watched it. His daughter went crazy for it, wore it out. And then he had approached, the folks at public television about bringing that to life and connecting with the woman who thought up the whole Barney idea. And then the rest is history. But we were co-hosting live, and it was a Britcom night, the British comedies. And then there was a particular British movie that they were showing. And I'm on camera and tossing to him, and then he's tossing to me, and we're going back and forth. And I had the IFB, so I was listening to the producer. But, I love ad-libbing too. I love when anything can happen, and I got to put two things together and make it look like it was supposed to be. I find some people may run out of the studio screaming and crying. I am actually drawn to that. I love when things happen, and it's up to us to, smooth it out live on air. So it was really something, because all of a sudden I saw on the other side of the cameras sheer panic. And then I see the door open to the studio, and somebody that came down the elevator from master control come running into the studio, almost running on camera, but stopping themselves. And they were trying to flag the co-host and Larry, and to get his attention, because he's the national program director. They needed his assistance because they realized upstairs in master control, they had aired part 2 of this movie before airing part 1. And it was already rolling credits, and then there was nothing left. There was all this dead air. So we were on camera live in between that. And it was like a break in between the movie. And they pulled him out of the studio, and then it was just me. And it was me vamping about all the virtues of the movie, of PBS, and the whole scenario.
How long did you have to film?
That was about 35 minutes.
Oh my God.
And with nothing, there was nothing there. And they were handing me below camera view everything that PBS offers. And I had no idea what they were going to hand to me below camera view until I had it in my hand. I said, that feels like a mug. And we also have this available as well.
Wow.
And then this hand would toss it off to that person below camera. And then this thing was handed. And it was fantastic for me because it was a challenge.
I hope you
and
have that tape. Do you have that tape?
I do have that. Yeah,
I'd love to see that. Put that on YouTube.
I have a storage bin that actually has, 3/4 inch.
Put that up on YouTube. The public has to see that.
And they were like, Jim, just keep going. Jim, just keep going. And I've told that story. And there's been many other times where that's happened on television and radio, or I've been on stage and sets fell, or somebody fell ill, and Jim, you got to go out there. And one time I was doing a Christmas concert live with my friend Tim Janis, who's a monumental composer and arranger and musician. And he has had about 10 different PBS specials. He's a dear friend. And every year he has put on this massive holiday concert at Carnegie Hall. And it is to raise funds for the Golden Hat Foundation to support Kate Winslet's foundation to support autism research. So Tim brings in, all kinds of major talent, Sir James Galway, and actors and singers and musicians, a full orchestra, a kids choir, the whole thing. And I'm the MC, the master of ceremonies, and I write all the intros. Henry Mancini's wife was there, Monica Mancini, all these fabulous people. And they have done it generally every year. And it's a massive 2 to 3 hour concert live at Carnegie Hall at Christmas time. And I write all the intros and do, the whole thing as the MC. And there was one time about 50% into this glorious Christmas concert with a packed house at Carnegie Hall in good old New York. I'm waiting to go back on, and you know how it is at Carnegie Hall. They have the big white door, and they open the door, and the talent comes out, and then they close the door, and everybody's behind the door, and then they open it, and it's a well-oiled machine at Carnegie Hall. And I kept saying to myself, "Oh, I want to say this line. I want to say this line. Should I say this line? We're at Carnegie Hall. I don't know. Should I do this or not?" I'm in my tuxedo as the master of ceremonies. We're halfway into this Christmas concert. People are feeling good. They're hearing the music, all of it. And I come out. They announce, okay, here's Jim Masters once again. They open the door, and I come out. The orchestra is behind me. The choir is behind me. The rows of people at Carnegie Hall are in front of me, and I come to the edge of the stage with the microphone just before I introduce the next talented performer. And there was a line that I rehearsed, and I said, "Oh, should I say it or not?" So I'm looking at the beautiful, well-dressed audience at Carnegie Hall. The orchestra is waiting, and I come out and I say, "Aren't you glad you decided not to go bowling tonight?" And the entire audience erupted in laughter and cheering and clapping. And it was totally out of left field. I'm in a tuxedo, totally unexpected. But I said, you know what? It's a New York audience. It's Christmas time. You sort of feel the room. And when I went back, the door opened and I went back behind the big white door before I come back out again. These folks at Carnegie Hall are true professionals, and they're very focused on what they do. They were high-fiving, and they were like, "Oh my God, we've never heard that before." And it was just one of those opportunities. And I took it.
As Bill O'Reilly would have said to us, we did it live tonight.
We did it live. Yes, we did, my friend. And we did this live as well. And you're a blessing to us all, Ernie. This is the second time you've been with us, first time with the Peter Marshall tribute. Don't be a stranger. Come see us again. And I hope whether you're visiting back here on the East Coast or I'm out doing a TV shoot or something in your area in LA, I'd love to break bread and stay in touch. And thanks for all the stories, all the memories. Congratulations on everything. And I hope you enjoyed the time with me as I absolutely have with you, Ernie.
Thank you very much, Jim. Good night.
The pleasure is all mine. You be well, okay?
You as well. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care now. Cheers. Fade to black.
Yeah.
Thank you to Ernie, and thank you to you for joining us as well. What an amazing conversation. Truly went in so many different directions, and really it all started with the Mike Douglas show. That really was the big break for Ernie, but so many incredible things he's done since. Look for what he was talking about, which he's most proud of, Daytime Revolution. We showed you that little clip of the trailer celebrating this iconic show and all the things that went with it. But again, we talked about so many shows that he's had an opportunity to be a part of over the years. That's Nancy Glass, of course, and Wheel of Fortune, Hollywood Squares Jeopardy, and Inside Edition, amazing stories about that, again in camera, and working with Regis Philbin, and just so many. This was really just the short list, folks, of his amazing career. We thank Ernie for joining us here on the show, and we thank you for being with us as well. If this was your first time here, we welcome you to the Jim Masters Show Live Entertainment Lifestyle Celebrity Talk Show series, where many of our guests say we are bringing back the lost art of conversation, and we're doing it in style. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to give this episode a thumbs up like on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. Definitely do that. Share this episode on your social media. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, as well. It doesn't cost anything. Be sure and click the notification bell icon next to the word subscribe so you'll be alerted about all our fabulous guests and all the special moments we have coming up for you. Don't forget, you can also binge watch all of the episodes. We're, something like 1,200 and counting as of today. We're getting towards that mark. Imagine that, hundreds and hundreds of shows with amazing celebrity friends and guests that you can watch and enjoy on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. That's all there for your liking. And leave a comment as well. Leave a comment underneath this episode. What are some of your favorite moments? What are some of your favorite shows as well? And this is not an IFB. This is just the ear. You see this little cord here. This is just so I can hear him, and I can also hear the music, the show open and everything. But now that our guest isn't here, we don't need this now. We worked hard, Ernie and I, to put this together, and he had a power failure during it, and the computers weren't working. But I tell you, what a trooper. And it was really very, very special, and very special for me to have him with us as well. He really is an icon in the industry and responsible for so many hours and years of great television, and is continuing. He just mentioned he's working on Celebrity Wheel of Fortune with Pat Sajak. That is so incredibly exciting. So if you enjoyed it, folks, come see us again. Spread the word. Leave a comment. What are some of the shows and some of the things we talked about that bring back memories for you? Leave a comment in the comments section as well. To all of our JMS Lovities commenting in the comments section, we thank you as well. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Come by and see us again if this is your first time watching our show, our Entertainment Lifestyle Celebrity Talk Show series we call The Jim Masters Show. We try to make it easy. Just play off my name, Jim Masters. Come see us again, and welcome to the JMS family. It's a pleasure to have you here. So for all of us, don't forget, take care of one another, love one another, and don't forget to do the very same for yourself. Go binge watch some of past episodes. Spread the word about our show. We love you all. Be well, take care, and come join us again here at Levity Hall and the Jim Masters Show. We'll be waiting for you. We love when you're here. Be well and cheers.